Hello and welcome back to the Corporate Flood and Heat Risk Management Program's Flood Resiliency Module Series, developed in partnership between the partners in Project Green and the Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program out of the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. Today's module is Module 4, Use of LID and Green Infrastructure to help manage on-site stormwater management risks. This is the fourth installment in this webinar series. In these online videos, we will be discussing the impacts that flooding is having across the Greater Toronto Area and beyond as we are faced with increasing frequency and intensity of storm events brought on by climate change and intensive urbanization. Businesses of all sizes and sectors have a unique opportunity and role to play in mitigating and adapting to climate change through sustainable stormwater management to benefit their surrounding community, but also their day-to-day operations, along with their business's bottom line. This series will be able to highlight the issues with flooding, their primary causes, how to best protect your business, and support you in finding solutions that help the environment and save you money through protecting one of your most valuable assets. We hope you enjoy this webinar series and its associated resources. So, for today's module, we will be covering 4 overarching topics to learn about the effectiveness and adaptability of green infrastructure and low-impact developments in association with stormwater management and water quality. We will showcase life cycle costs of LID, where they are best utilized, and success stories from other ICI properties who have adopted these best management practices across the GTA and Southern Ontario. So to start with Chapter 1, we'll be going over different low-impact development types and their importance in today's environment. So what is green infrastructure? Green infrastructure is a very broad term that in general means a natural vegetated system and green technologies that collectively provide society with a multitude of economic, environmental, and social benefits. These can include things such as urban forests and naturalized woodlots, bioswales, engineered or also known as human-made wetlands and stormwater ponds, wetlands, ravines, waterways, and other riparian zones, or shoreline zones. These are the areas between water and land come together. Meadows and agricultural lands, green roofs and green walls or facades in urban areas, and parks, gardens, and open grassed areas. So we'll be focusing on what green infrastructure is, how it associates with low impact development and why we need low impact development. And then we will go through the major low impact development types and their functionality. To break down the term of green infrastructure further, we want to focus first on how it's defined. So this was defined by the Green Infrastructure of Ontario group back in 2021. So GI, or green infrastructure, are natural vegetated systems and green technologies that collectively provide society with a multitude of economic, environmental, and social benefits, as we just briefly talked about before. Now, to go a little further, there's 2 different primary types of GI. The first is natural capital or natural green assets. These are a subset of green infrastructure and the stock of natural resources and ecosystems, such as forests or wetlands, that yield a flow of benefits to people. Examples given here are natural vegetated systems, such as wetlands, as we see in the picture above, and woodlots that don't require further human modification to help protect us from higher levels of potential flood, increased infiltration rates, or co-benefits of helping cool nearby areas. The second are engineered or enhanced assets, as we see below here in a rain garden or bioretention style system that was developed in one of the Peel region primary schools nearby. These elements and installations have been created to mimic natural functions along with processes in the service of human interests. So more specifically, which falls under this engineered or enhanced asset section are low impact developments, or LID. So these are stormwater management strategies that seek to mitigate the impacts of increased urban runoff and stormwater pollution by managing it as close to source as possible. Examples include rain gardens, as we see here in the bottom, bioretention, permeable pavements, green roofs, and underground cisterns. So we can see this even better when we break it down through this flowchart. Through green infrastructure, you can have low impact developments or engineered assets and enhanced assets or natural vegetated systems. And you can see it broken down in each section. Under LID, we have bioretention and permeable pavements, and they help mimic at the point source and at a lower scale naturalized wetlands and nearby woodlots. So, as we've now heard about what green infrastructure is, how does low impact development fit into this, and how does it fit under the green infrastructure banner? So, low impact developments are stormwater management and land development strategies applied at the parcel and subdivision scale that emphasize conservation and use of on site natural features integrated with engineered small scale hydrologic controls. And this more closely mimics pre development functions. So, this philosophy is to see that we want to utilize existing and natural drainage systems first and then move towards engineered forms. So, a great example of this is the neighborhood picture here we see at the right of the slide. This neighborhood has been built around natural heritage and preserves pockets of forest and wetland and worked with it as part of their stormwater management plan. The next level and tier after these siting strategies is then implementing low impact development best management practice facilities, which are more engineered practices and installations that replicate natural hydrologic pathways that are lost during regular development. The way that this neighborhood here works, we can see that this more mature forest tracts have been kept in place. This is not a typical grid area that you would see in most older subdivisions, but they've really maintained a lot of that green infrastructure. Even the park area here, where they've cut some of the trees away, they've kept a large forest swath there and still allow for recreational activities with a pool and tennis court on site. But this allows to stop high levels of wind damage or wind erosion with those buffers for the forest there. They help soak up more water. And then you can see you can have pathways, as you can see at the top right of the picture, and a riverine area that can flow behind. So this is a stormwater kind of management strategy that, as we talked about before, we're trying to mitigate what was naturally there, but still allowing us as humans to still live in the environment and still try to mimic and get as close to what was previously there before we developed. So as we talk about LID, similar to GI, there's two primary differences between low impact developments. And these are non-structural LIDs and best management practices, and then structural LIDs or best management practices. So on the left, we'll focus on non-structural LIDs first. So this is used in the LID kind of thought process, and we're seeking to reduce stormwater runoff impacts through through sound site planning and design. So even before there's any implementation, this becomes a planning site design strategy. How can we best mimic and keep what natural functions are there and still develop new urbanized areas? So non-structural LID best management practices include things such as minimizing site disturbances, preserving important site features, as we saw those forest swaths on the last page, reducing and disconnecting impervious cover, flattening slopes to make sure you're not having high levels of water rush down areas where that can cause high levels of erosion and disturbances, utilizing native vegetation already on site, and minimizing turf grass lawns and maintaining natural drainage features and characteristics. So the examples we have here are minimizing these hard surfaces, having these traffic calming bump out areas, which are actually vegetated. So what can be installed here is, as a non-structural LID, this can be put out. And then what could be put on here is a structural LID, which we'll get into shortly, which could be something like a bioretention or rain garden on these vegetated bump outs that also help reduce car travel flow and making sure speeds are kept to a minimum. And then, as we talked about before, you're preserving natural features and assets which are on site. So as the past neighborhood showed, and this neighborhood shows in this picture, you're keeping large swaths of green infrastructure, large swaths of forested areas, which help with co-benefits of reducing the nearby heat island effect. You're cooling the area by shading nearby buildings. You're having that natural sponge by keeping the forested areas, and you're reducing wind erosion or wind damage by creating a natural buffer and barrier between yourself and the open kind of grassed farmland areas we see in the bottom of that picture. Now, structural best management practice in low impact developments are used to control and treat runoff. and perform these functions as close to the runoff source as possible, meaning where the rain falls, you want to capture this water as quick as possible so you're not causing runoff later down in the watershed, causing potential flood issues. So these are typically smaller in size than standard structural best management practices, such as a wastewater treatment plant or a stormwater pond. And structural LID best management practices include various types of basins, filters, infiltrating surfaces, and devices located on individual lots in a residential development area or throughout a larger commercial, industrial, or institutional development site in these areas that are not typically suited for larger centralized structural facilities, like a large stormwater management pond or a very large dry pond area or kind of a wastewater treatment plant area or heavier developed area that we've used in the past. So examples like this can be permeable pavements and driveways or bioretention swales and rain gardens of that sort. And we'll actually get into some commercial sites here within the GTHA that have adopted some of these more structural LIDs, as well as including that non-point source and non-structural LID planning process ahead of time. So really what this picture here we're showing is we want to move from pre-development areas in these heavily focused areas that are mostly naturalized forests to a heavily urbanized suburban area where we're still trying to maintain the best as possible the natural water cycle so we're not increasing the levels of runoff or flood potential. So why do we need LID? Well, we have to have people can be housed in these areas. We have to increase more areas so where people can live. So as we move away from those more natural covered areas to more urbanized covered areas, you're leaving a forested, very permeable location to more impervious covers. So in this picture we see on the right, you have a typical suburban neighborhood. You have high levels of roof square footage, more sidewalks, more roads, more compacted services. And what do all these have in common? They're impermeable land covers. So because of this, we have to install more municipal minor system areas, meaning we have to upscale and pay more money out of our taxes for more stormwater management facilities like our sewers and storm sewer systems. But then on top of that, we have to somehow adopt LIDs to make sure we're not putting too much pressure on these areas as we start urbanizing more over these next couple of decades. So we have to look at it in a holistic way. We have to try and maintain water balance and maintain water quality while still having places where people can live and grow. LEDs are trying to mimic this water cycle that previous management approaches weren't able to mimic to such a degree. And these we'll talk about briefly as well in today's module that we really started using and focusing on from the 50s up until the 1990s. So why do we need to switch from these prototypical or formerly used quote unquote end of pipe controls that use stormwater management ponds or stormwater facilities now to moving more to a point source control and adopting LIDs into this whole system? Well, we'll get into that briefly. So you might remember this slide talking about the consequences of higher runoff from Module 1. We briefly went over it, but we're going to be revisiting it today along with a number of new slides highlighting some of the benefits LID can provide and some of the things that LID can help us avoid by helping offset common issues in our watershed by just simply using end-of-pipe controls that we previously used the last couple of decades. So here we see the consequences of higher levels of runoff in our river system. So with increased stream flow volume and increased peak flow, we can see that things like our mean annual discharge, here's an example of Highline Creek at West Hill, has increased over the last 50 years. So that the average mean annual discharge has increased by 4.2% per year, meaning that you're having higher water flows, higher levels of volume coming down the river. And what that causes is this undercutting and erosion we see in the bottom picture here, and the more disastrous erosion that occurs when we have built infrastructure, as we see the car up here in the parking lot, which we're sure this person didn't park here on purpose. So we can see that as we're increasing stream flow volume, you're increasing your peak flow, meaning where you can have heavy rushing waters, which can cause more flooding downstream. This also creates a change or alteration in our stream channels. This higher stream flow volume increases the frequency of peak flow events, and also reduces our base flows. And what a reduction in base flow means is as the river naturally moves and gets more engineered higher up in the stream system, it's causing the river to meander or shift. It's starting to curve more and trying to find its way more in this urbanized environment. So what happens is you have these undercutting and erosion, which occurs in these pictures here shown on the right. And what that causes more potential for erosion to occur, but it also increases the width of the river. And as you're increasing the width, that discharge rate causes the water, it has to spread out with this increased width. So you're actually dropping the level, the base flow, the level of water that flows through. And what happens with these alterations is you're having extreme bank erosion. We talked about you're having a loss of shoreline vegetation and tree canopy areas. You're increasing turbidity, which means you have that muddy water, which you can see in the bottom. Just means it's kicking up more suspended sediments. The water becomes less clear. And because the base flow is decreasing, the water level is lower. This decreases suitable spawning, hunting, and nesting habitat for herpetological species, which just means species like salamander, so the endangered Jefferson salamander, frog and toad species, as well as snakes and turtles, but then aquatic species and macroinvertebrate species. So aquatic species being like fish and things of that nature, and then macroinvertebrate just means things like crayfish or water bugs, things with kind of an outer shell. And that's what happens when you have more of this discharge going down our stream systems. So many of these erosion and sedimentation effects aren't usually experienced initially after heavy urbanization and construction occurs, but it doesn't actually become known or really felt until sometime after this increased level of uptake. So stream channels continue to enlarge, erode, and move decades after development has first occurred. So this can cause issues with waterfront properties and businesses years and decades after heavy urbanization. So Toronto is going to be managing these levels of meandering and shifting river systems far into the future instead of what we've just experienced thus far. Another big thing we have to focus on is water quality and thermal effects. So since urban runoff volumes often increase by 2 to 5 times after development has occurred, and stormwater pond effluent temperatures, meaning the water leaving the pond, are between 4 and 11 degrees warmer than water that first enters these stormwater ponds nearby our businesses and homes. The overall thermal load, meaning the overall level of water entering a major system like Lake Ontario, in the picture we can see here in Toronto on the lakeshore, can be very significant. And we're left with problems such as water quality, total suspended sediments, meaning that pickup of those sediments making water more muddy, harder to see for a lot of fish species. It can also lead to other flooding events, erosion stream bed alterations. And a great example of this is 12 Mile Creek has the fish species we see here on the left. It's a minnow species called red-side dace. Red-side dace are also known as a bioindicator species, meaning if you can't find them in an area where they historically used to be, that means there's higher levels of construction and urbanization and pollution that have started to occur there if you can't find them there anymore. And this is because they can't live in highly turbid or very muddy waters. So these species are, as I talked about before, bioindicator species. And we start to see these species end up on the provincial endangered species list and the federal Species at Risk Act and list because we're having more urbanization occur in our cities and towns. So another great input of when we talk about the benefits of LID, we can see on the top right FLIR imaging of a green roof next to a traditional roof. And what FLIR imaging shows us is the level of temperature and heat coming off a certain surface. So there's a difference in heat on this FLIR imaging picture showing rainwater heats up quicker and more with stormwater ponds and on roofs that don't have greenery or green roofs. And the first flush is hot, or the first flush is very hot, but after that it can cool down significantly. But the green roof picture we see here, you see the deep purple colors. That's actually a green roof showing it's a lot lower, 74 degrees on a summer day. But here we have a typical asphalt roof or roof tile roof here on the right, which is bright yellow and orange. that's going up towards 151 degrees. So you have a variance of literally 2 times the amount of temperature being experienced on a roof without green infrastructure. And that's just a great picture we like to show as the co-benefits. It can soak up a lot of rainwater coming and hitting our urbanized rooftops, as well as it can help cool the surrounding area and the building itself. As well, we can see here on the bottom right, we have a box plot graph, um, and it shows thermal load reductions for common low impact development practices. So any LID measure that decreases runoff volumes or temperatures, or even better, both, can help mitigate thermal loads to streams or downstream treatment facilities. Examples here that are used on this chart are bioretention, infiltration trenches or chambers, enhanced swales, permeable pavements, and other absorbent landscaping and increased canopy cover. So the most effective practices we could see were deeper systems, such as trenches which are built underground, some deep bioretention facilities, and practices that promote significant runoff volume reductions. So you can have the benefit of both. You can help attenuate higher levels of runoff by having LID practices such as permeable pavers, infiltration trenches, and green roofs, as well as bioretention, but you're also decreasing the thermal load reduction. In some areas, as we can see, the infiltration trench between 80 to 100% thermal load reduction. So that really helps out our bioindicator species, like the red side dace. It helps cool our local water systems and lakes, and helps reduce the chance for high levels of algal blooms and anoxic conditions, which just means lower levels of oxygen occurring in those areas. So we don't want quote unquote dead lakes or dead rivers. We want to make sure these are as healthy as possible. So beyond reducing temperatures and runoff volumes, enhancing infiltration with these types of LID practices helps reestablish the natural base flow conditions that existed prior to development, and also helps keep our temperatures of our river systems and our lake systems as low as possible. And we don't have these dirty, turbid blooms occurring with our river systems entering Lake Ontario, as we see in the top center picture shown above. So another big thing we have to focus on when we talk about more urbanization and just the fact that we live in a four-season area such as Ontario is we have to use higher levels of chlorides and salt, meaning rock salt in the winter, to make sure we don't have high levels of snow causing dangerous driving conditions. So we want to talk about the different graphs we have here, and the picture shown here on the right of TRCA's watershed. So the graph shown here at the top left shows increasing average levels of chloride found in Atherley Narrows, a rural sampling location between Lake Couchiching and Lake Simcoe. Over the past few decades, due in part to increased use of rock salt in parking lots, roadways, and commercial and residential properties nearby, from 2005 up to 2020, the amount of chloride increase per year has doubled in comparison to 1971 to 1986. This difference is 1.26 milligrams per liter per year versus 0.6 milligrams per liter per year, in concert with those 2-year variances I mentioned. It's estimated that by the next century, the average level of chloride within Lake Simcoe watershed will exceed the 120 milligram per liter guideline set by the Canadian Water Quality Guidelines back in 2012, meaning that higher levels of salt are going to be negatively affecting fishing populations, will be impacting tourism, and can be impacting boating and other biodiversity targets in the area. Meanwhile, the bottom left, we see a frog, and this is representative of a study by researchers at Yale and Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York. The study found that interactive effects of excess road salt on wood frog species, sex ratios, and sexual size dysmorphism, so it can affect how they grow naturally. Over a series of experiments conducted, the authors of the paper in the Canadian Journal of Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences discovered that the number of females within the studied population of tadpoles had decreased by approximately 10% when they were exposed to higher levels of road salt. These findings actually suggest that road salt may have a masculizing effect on various amphibian species, meaning over time, it's going to be harder for these species to consistently reproduce at healthy levels. So we're impacting our local aquatic and herpetological species going forward with high levels of road use and salt. The graph, though, on the top right shows research that was conducted by our Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program group, comparing chloride level discharges between typical asphalt driveways and roadways and two commonly used low impact development practices, being permeable pavement and bioretention. The results here show that asphalt releases salt in very concentrated and quick bursts during the winter months, whereas LIDs release it more gradually over the entire year. The importance of this is LID typically delays the release of salt to receiving waters through temporary storage of these elevated chloride levels within their soils and then slowly releases it over time. The benefit is this can help to reduce peak concentrations in discharges of salt and push discharges into the spring when streams have greater levels of dilution and higher levels of flow within their capacity, meaning that the salt won't actually impact the local aquatic species as harshly as if they were just a concentrated burst in comparison to asphalt. So runoff infiltration in LID practices also helps reduce salt loading to streams that can harm these riparian aquatic and semi-aquatic species of animals and plants. Permeable pavements can improve drainage and prevent meltwater from ponding and refreezing on site. So this is another benefit when we're talking about co-benefits, where you're not going to have as many slips, trips, and falls concerns, and you can actually salt permeable pavement sites, especially parking lots, a lot less, both saving you money, time, as well as concerns about liability with slips, trips, and falls. Some permeable pavements also have a higher friction coefficient, and all this means is they're a lot grippier than traditional asphalt that can reduce the amount of salt needed to create these slip-free surfaces throughout the winter months. So as we can see here, the study we conducted back in 2012, we also have the acute chloride guideline and the chronic chloride guideline. So keeping the acute chloride guideline, which is at 640 milligrams per liter, and the chronic chloride guidelines we talked about before, which is 120 milligrams per liter, we can see that permeable pavement and bioretention fall under it, especially when we're going towards our April, May, and June months when a lot of the snow is naturally melting. Our bioretention practices actually doesn't even touch the chronic chloride guideline whatsoever in any concentrated burst of releasing of any of our chloride levels amounts, showing that LIDs can also not only help with water quantity and flood issues, but can help with water quality and pollutant loads. Finally, in the bottom right, we have our watershed map here of TRCA with varied colored circles. And these circles actually depict the average chloride concentrations that is collected by our water sampling network. This was done between 2016 to 2020 through grab samples, meaning we grab samples of water simply with simple bottles that we can then get tested later. Most stations in the southeastern part of TRCA's watershed within Etobicoke and Mimico Creeks, along with the Humber River, had a much higher level than the Canadian Water Quality Guidelines, which is a 2012 document on allowable levels of contaminants, of which case chloride or salt is included. Acute levels of chloride is 640 milligrams per liter, some at more than 3 times this concentration areas as you start getting to bigger and more red dots. In 2022, online sensors were installed to measure chloride concentrations at the mouth of several GTA watersheds, and the monitoring results included the following. In Highland Creek, peak concentrations were 8,400 milligrams per liter. This is 70 times the Canadian Water Quality Guideline limit for chronic effects and 13 times the Canadian Water Quality Guideline limit for acute effects of aquatic organisms. So what this means, chronic and acute, chronic is longer lasting, so it's a lower concentration, but over a long period of time, over months and years, this can start causing issues with fish species or species like frogs, where it can cause sex dysmorphism, body dysmorphism, and growth issues, as well as mortality rates with their young. In Duffins Creek, the peak concentration was 3,000 milligrams per liter, which is 25 times this limit for chronic and 5 times the limit for acute effects of aquatic organisms. These high concentrations pose a considerable threat to all these different organisms, both plant and animals, as well as the overall ecosystem health, especially considering the frequency and duration of these values in our major water courses in urbanized areas within our watershed. The findings highlight the need for increased water monitoring efforts and requirements for new sensor technology to both capture and accurately represent the current state and health of our rivers and stream systems. In previous years, chloride concentrations greater than that of sea level concentrations, meaning 19,000 milligrams per liter, meaning you can literally taste the salt in the water, have been observed in tributaries of the Credit River, showing our over reliance on salt and our need to reduce it. So, when we talk about salt management, this is one of the ways that we can start looking at some ways to help manage these and our best management practices. So combined with the benefits of LIDs to help reduce the impacts of salt on receiving water bodies, we just talked about near your business, we at STEP have also created a series of documents, tables, and a web page strictly focused and directly focused on salt management best practices for commercial property sidewalks and parking areas. So these include the above tables. The table here we can see on the far right showcases best measures and best management practices for salt reduction measures and their estimated impact on your overall salt use on site and its impact on your overall annual contract cost for snow removal services with your third-party contractors. So we can see things such as effective pricing of your services, accurate salt delivery time, efficient application with pre-wetting and or anti-icing practices, low chloride alternatives, reducing application rates, and professional training and certification. And we'll make sure that all these tables and documents will be included on the PPG module webpage, so you can access these after today's module. The table here shown at the center bottom, this showcases resilient turf grass species, which are particularly useful in the design of vegetated filter strips, dry ponds, and enhanced grass swale systems on your commercial property sites. The Ministry of Transportation has standardized a number of grass mixes as shown here, and they've labeled them salt tolerant mixes and a list of particular value for low impact development applications alongside asphalt driveways and paved walkways and commercial parking lots. So a lot of these fescue or tall grasses can be used on your commercial property sites around your grassed areas, around your parking lots, and are really tolerant to salt. So that means you can still spread salt at a reduced level, but you're not going to have that dieback nearby. And if they're planted within LID facilities you might choose to implement on your property, they'll also help improve your infiltration rates and last over long term. So you don't have to worry about rehabilitation costs or maintenance costs of continually planting new species every year. The picture on the bottom left talks about the importance of professional training. One of the things we talk about in the measures in the table we talked about before. So the professional training and certification can be used for your property managers or hired contractors that you should ask for. So there are 4 rights to salt application and management, applying the right material in the right amount at the right time of day and in the right place. So this can only be achieved by a knowledgeable individual who has gone through the appropriate training. And as a property owner of a commercial business, ICI, or multi-use residential property, you can request this evidence of salt management experience for all winter maintenance staff and require training and certification through Ontario's Smart About Salt program we've seen here. This program was first developed to help to ensure that contractors have the necessary skills to implement best practices for road salt use and management. Property managers and work staff from businesses are also encouraged to receive training through the Smart About Salt program, as these staff are responsible for overseeing operations and providing direction on snow storage areas and other critical elements of your business's winter maintenance plan. Diligence of the contractor and property manager is ensuring that plowing and salting are conducted in a responsible manner and have a strong influence on the amount of salt applied. More knowledgeable and better trained professionals would be expected to exercise greater care and due diligence. If training is only undertaken by supervisors, a modest impact on salt use would be expected. If the training, though, extends to your frontline staff, including drivers, and the effect on salt application rates can be expected to be more significant. So, great example of this. It's worth noting that in the City of Toronto, the implementation of a new road salt management training program for their winter maintenance supervisors and operators reduced their salt use by almost 37,000 tons over two winter seasons, and saved nearly $1.9 million in that time period. The remaining pictures we have here are talking about some of these salt management best practices, and they're shown here really in action. So we can see at the top left, we show a de-icer agent being applied to a roadway before a precipitation or major snow event occurs. So likely this truck above here is using a brine, which is a mixture of water and rock salt, and a calcium chloride liquid brine or magnesium chloride liquid brine. By pre-wetting rock salt with brine or an agricultural byproduct as it's applied, this can help it stick and adhere to the road better and reduce the amount of rock salt required to be spread before a major or during a major snow event in the winter. The top middle picture shows a large snow pile that's actually not very well graded. And what this means is it can easily fall out onto the surrounding available parking spaces, plus the extent of melting is creating a large puddle in the foreground that will freeze overnight and require further salting of your contractor or maintenance staff and can result in potential slip, trips, and falls for staff or visitors on site. The center middle picture shows 3 brine holding tanks that can reuse meltwater from salt-induced snowmelt to be reused on your pavement surfaces in your high traffic areas on your business's site. These systems are generally built with corrosion-free materials to maximize the product's lifetime. And finally, the bottom middle picture shows an empty parking lot after a winter storm. This is a prime example of an area that could be closed off to users, reducing the need for salting on your site or other maintenance practices in the winter. This can save your company time and money while also reducing the likelihood of excess salt washing off into nearby waterways or entering the municipal stormwater system come spring. A lot of these best management practices and more, including rough prices and what to expect, can be found on our Salt Wiki page, of which we'll include along with the links to a lot of these different references and documents. So we talked about conventional stormwater management, and it hasn't resolved the problems from the 50s up until the 90s. And this is another reason for the benefit of adopting low impact developments in LIDs. So why are we moving away from what we did back in the 1970s? Well, what was done before was really a one-dimensional approach through large centralized facilities next to creeks and waterways, and it was an end-of-pipe detention and controlled release. We assumed we could drive benefits from stormwater management just by controlling for peak flows by releasing water at a safe rate. And the example we can see here in the top right is a typical stormwater management pond. So we can see it has extreme flood protection for a 100-year level, meaning a 1 in 100-year storm event could occur, and it could hold that level of a major storm event. And what a 1 in 100-year event means doesn't mean it's going to happen once one every 100 years, but it's more of actually a percentage of likelihood. So 1 in 100-year storm, as we've heard, is occurring more often due to more urbanization and climate change, is you'll have years where you have a 1 in 100-year storm occur in an area in back-to-back years. That just means there's a 1% chance of that happening once every single year. But as we're seeing higher levels of climate change impacts and more urbanization impacts, as well as old infrastructure that doesn't have the ability to convey a lot of this exceedingly high levels of precipitation and water falling, it's more likely that these 1 in 100-year events can become more active and a higher percentage. We also have overbank flood protection level for a 1 in 25-year level event, really meaning within that case, it's having a 10% chance, a 1 in 10 year would be a 10% chance, 25-year would be a 5% chance, any of your channel protection level, as well as a permanent pool or water quality volume, letting water settle over time. So the fundamental goal for stormwater ponds during this time period is matching that pre-development 1 in 2 year storm event, meaning it could happen at a 50% interval every single year, up to that 1 in 100-year storm event, as we just talked about. In this series, we were controlling for erosion, flooding, and water quality from, again, this one-dimensional approach using stormwater management ponds. Wet ponds came into effect in the 1990s and replaced, for the most part, dry ponds, or just large, deep depression areas where you would see these that almost look like kind of valleys or open grassed areas. These are what are referred to as dry ponds, and you'll find them a lot in older residential areas. And these are less effective. So with a wet pond, you're allowing more settling, and you're actually allowing more cooler water to go through the whole system over a time period of a number of days. With low impact developments, we're not solely reliant just on stormwater management ponds or dry ponds and other end of pipe controls from decades past. So we're not assuming excess runoff can be stored and released at just a safe rate using this one-dimensional approach. And our original focus on downstream flood control was simply just using these dry and wet flood ponds. So principle extended in attempt to manage water quality and downstream erosion got into the 1990s, and that's how we started using these wet pond approaches. And you can see a picture of a typical stormwater management pond nearby a newer residential neighborhood that was probably built in the late 90s or early 2000s. And here in the map of our TRCA watershed, we can actually see the number of different stormwater management ponds that you can see with the red dots all across our jurisdiction. So really, these conventional stormwater management hasn't resolved the problem. Again, as we talked about before, it's a one-dimensional approach. We want to make sure we're managing water at the point source where rain falls, and this is where LIDs can be used in conjunction with stormwater management ponds and dry ponds. We're not doing away with them, but we're making sure we're using them in concert with these older types of management strategies. So this is where we saw the flaws in the extended detention approach. And what this means is here we first see a histogram of discharge and rain over time during a typical storm event. And this we can see is happening in pre-development, which we can see along the green line on the bottom. You can see that the peak discharge in rain doesn't go that high. Next, we see the post-development peak discharge rate with no stormwater management practices or end of pipe or other words. And that's this high red line showing a high level of peak discharge in rain, meaning peak discharge occurs when you're having rain as shown by these blue graphs here, these histogram graphs and bar chart. The rain afterwards or discharge is this red line coming up. And what that means, there's a higher level chance of flooding occurring, either rivering through our waterways or high levels of runoff occurring. Now we see the green line showing post-development with the stormwater management pond implemented, releasing water gradually back in the system. And this is, again, what we used, the one-dimensional approach back in the 1970s. So we can see this in the lighter green version, and it's showing that the peak discharge is as high and it is extended out, that extended approach. So we're having water be released gradually over time. Now the space in between with this checkered green area shows the runoff volume amount difference between our pre-development area, which shows a lower peak discharge time, and it slowly and quickly goes up and then quickly goes back down, showing that there's less likelihood of a major flood event to occur because our peak discharge does not go that high. So what this graph shows is that ponds by themselves aren't doing the trick because they don't come close to pre-development runoff volume amounts. Yes, they can maybe meet the discharge level at a small point source, but you're still going to have that high peak charge occur quite rapidly with rain events. So you can still have some flooding events or runoff events occurring at the beginning of the rain event and a longer period after time. So therefore, with this discharge difference of runoff volume, in this green hashed area, this is where LID can come into play. So we've really worked from the 50s to high development times down to the 70s and 90s with this extended stormwater management approach, and this area in between to try and get back to our pre-development area. With LID adopted in these areas before and after a storm event, we can bring this post-development curve a little closer to pre-development naturalized area. So again, in the extended detention approach with stormwater management pond, there was no safe way to discharge 2 to 6 times higher runoff levels. So design assumptions were unrealistic at the time, and we were using the simplified one-dimensional approach. It can still alter stream flow regimes, so this is a good thing. It can help us, but does not mitigate loss of natural flow pathways or temperature impacts. So these cumulative effects of watershed development are not managed. And again, this is the niche area where LIDs can be adopted and can help out municipalities with these historical or legacy developments in our stormwater management approach. So channels continue to erode despite these stormwater management approaches, which we previously saw in the 1900s through the 70s and out to the 90s. So what this figure shows is it illustrates the predicted change in erosion levels that would occur from 2002 conditions, our baseline, if a municipal official plan were built out with conventional development design, including just stormwater ponds. The dark gray areas are where development is set to occur. The purple bars represent an increase in erosion index. And what this means, we call erosion index, this is known as the potential for channel erosion to occur in a river and stream system. So erosion index is going to increase with more development and heavily urbanized areas because you're straightening our streams, higher peak flows, as we just talked about in our peak flow discharge discussion in the last slide. The height of the bar represents the magnitude of change, with the bar at the far left representing a 50% increase. Of particular note are the predicted increases of 240% and 100% increase in our erosion index, or the potential for river systems in these areas for channel erosion to occur and cause undercutting and damaging of nearby businesses and residential homes in the east and main branches of Rainbow Creek, respectively located within the main north and east Humber watersheds we can see here separated by the black lines. So as we can see, changes in erosion index from existing conditions to a planned build out. If we're doing traditional managed approaches with a one-dimensional approach of just using stormwater management ponds without LID, this is what can be expected. So municipalities have to really start approaching and looking at a whole systems approach of trying to ensure that natural infrastructure is kept in place, heavily urbanization isn't fully allowed without appropriate measures of keeping LIDs and proper site planning ahead of time, but also the implementation of more green infrastructure, more urbanized tree plantings, but also more LID adoption. So we're really rethinking stormwater infrastructure as we talk about the implementation of LID. So we talked about what are the former large centralized approaches of just using two stormwater management ponds in a traditional new development of a subdivision. We want to go to small distributed areas. You can still have larger stormwater management ponds in areas, but also you're reducing this area. This could be now park space instead of a large stormwater management pond here, but also you can have more development area up here. You're adding right here, taking this stormwater management pond out. You're adding about 5 to 6 new houses by having smaller ponds, but also LIDs on each property. So these can each be rain gardens on most properties. My apologies. Or bioswales, or like I said, rain gardens and permeable pavers, small, more distributed. You're moving from a single function, like having an underground cistern or outflowing out to our lake systems, into a multifunction approach. You can now have a parking lot that also includes a stormwater planter that includes trees and vegetated systems that's also connected to an underground pipe system that also has a permeable paver included. So you can still have usable area. We're moving from traditional pipes, sewers, curbs, and gutters, and we're moving to more soils, vegetation, and hardscapes that you can have in bioretention, bioswales, or rain garden systems. And then you can manage flow rates, not just by using stormwater management ponds, as we can see here on the left, but you're managing the whole water cycle. So you're managing evapotranspiration, you're managing infiltration rates by having more vegetative systems included. So that's the benefit of trying to rethink our traditional stormwater infrastructure and management plans with LID and green infrastructure included. And so what this slide is showing is, yes, we can still have the right, but we're trying to mimic the left, which is the pre-development hydrologic conditions. So we're trying to reverse some of these impacts and having a more naturalized pre-development water cycle with the adoption of LIDs and green infrastructure. So with that said, here are some of the benefits of LID. We have direct benefits. We've talked about them. Delayed timing of peak runoff, so lower potential for flooding and peak runoff rate, improved stream erosion control, you have better groundwater recharge, you have better pollutant and sediment removals, as we talked about with rock salt or high levels of phosphorus or nitrogen in nearby agricultural areas. And then you have co-benefits or ancillary benefits. So the creation of new jobs, you need technicians, you need project managers, you need developers, you need planners, all to be a part of this. You improve air quality and carbon mitigation. You have urban cooling, water conservation, lower energy use, as we showed with the FLIR imaging with the green roof, and improvements in mental health and well-being with using a lot of these features. So now we can move to LID types and functionality. So we're going to talk about 9 regularly used LID best management practices. And some of these we can show here. And some of these include showcasing um, bioswales or rain gardens. And you can see being used in residential properties and other commercial properties. You can see them here along marketways and kind of main streets. And then you can see them in more commercial properties and parking lots. So the main focus here is preventing, detaining, infiltrating, evapotranspiring, and then capturing and reusing a lot of this water that can be used. So we'll be going through a couple of these functions right now. So the first of which, one of the more commonly used ones and popular examples of LID when people think of low impact developments and green infrastructure are bioretention. So part of the charm of bioretention is it incorporates a very nice intrinsic value, which really creates a beautiful looking garden. You can use native plants, and you can even have the ability to have some pollinator species benefits, and which adds in a stormwater functionality to it. So it can be adapted to suit numerous sites. We can see here in the top left, as well as the top kind of right center here, can be used in parking lots, can also be used along sidewalks in the bottom left and the bottom center, boulevards, and then personal lot level usage at residential homes or commercial properties. And it can capture rainwater from roofs, and even larger versions can be constructed on ICI or institutional properties at schools and large industrial buildings, as we can see here in the top center. So bioretention is made up of an engineered sandy filter media, and that can be shown here. It has a growing media, which is included in that filter bed. It has a drainage layer below with clear stone, 3/4 inch clear stone. And along with native plants here, it can be adapted to both wet and dry conditions. They can also be salt tolerant, as we talked about in the slides just 3 back. At times, there's also a mulch layer on top to reduce weed growth and help to retain moisture for the planted vegetation during these drought conditions. So bioretention practices are also sometimes referred to as rain gardens, but normally when we say rain gardens, it's generally a less quote unquote engineered practice. It has fewer pipes and thinner filter media and no subsurface drainage. So what makes this practice here, any of these practices shown in the pictures, a bioretention cell, is we actually have high levels of filter media, and this removes a lot of contaminants, high levels of phosphorus, salt, so on. But then it has a storage layer of clearstone. So when high levels of runoff come off into this feature, off our parking lot, goes over a concrete curb. We also have an infiltration trench here and a kind of river rock, which stops erosion, slows the water down, and then goes into our bioretention cell. This is an example of the exact practice we have on site at the Courtright Center in Vaughan, Ontario. You have the storage layer of clearstone. When this fills up too much, and if there's high levels of water infiltrating down, we have a 10-centimeter perforated pipe here. And what that allows is water to move out of the practice, and that can actually be connected either downstream into a receiving water body, so it's been cleaned through this whole process and all these layers down, or it can be connected out to the minor system. So it can be connected out to a typical stormwater management catch basin you'd see in the side of roads. So all that to be said, it's a more engineered surface. You can make sure it can move out, water can be retained, but it can also be put back into our traditional system as well, and it can be used in conjunction with it. So here's a quick video of a bioretention cell being used. It has check dams, which allows for ponding and infiltration. We can see this is heavy levels of water flow over the river rock. And it has the river rock at the bottom for higher levels of conveyance. And you can see here's the plant species planted on the side. And this is an example of a bioretention practice on Mississauga Road. Water's coming out through a pretreatment device known as an oil grit separator from the road. And what that does is it allows the catch basins taking water off the road to clean out a lot of the contaminants, oil and grease, and gas that comes from cars, as well as larger contaminants like sand, gravel, and grit. And then it enters into this bioretention cell. It infiltrates through the river rocks on the bed here below during and after a rain event, where eventually the water will come out the other end as much cleaner and filtered water with less pollutants and suspended sediments after infiltrating through the engineered filter media, as we showed in that cross diagram in the slide before. The reason we have these areas where there's not a lot of ponding, or these rock check dams, as we call them, the buildup of rocks here, is it allows the redistribution over the whole practice. We can see it runs from here all the way down over to the lights. And this allows the proper conveyance of water going through the whole praxis and not just overwhelming one area. So it allows it to pond. When it gets too high, the water level, it can go over these check dams and into the next little cell features here, here, and further down. And this allows the water to infiltrate down, but in high levels of a major rain event, like what's happening right here in this video, it can keep conveying through the whole practice. So water is actually infiltrating and being treated throughout the filter media that runs the whole swath of this area on Mississauga Road. And then it enters underground to a perforated pipe system or under drain, as we showed in the last slide, and then can be connected out to the traditional miner system as used for our stormwater management sewer system. So we also have dry and enhanced swales. So these can be implemented along larger and longer road stretches. So they're different than the first three practices we've talked about, being bioretention, rain gardens, and even some other swale systems, because they're mainly used as conveyance installation. So it's used to move water from one point to another while maintaining high levels of vegetation in between. Check dams are added, as we can see in the pictures here, and even some areas here, because it increases ponding and retention of water and improves infiltration, while dry swales can also include under drain pipes and replace filter media. An enhanced swale is more of a surface feature, so you're not digging down and putting further infrastructure below this feature, and the gentle areas and slopes enhance settling along their entire length, as we can see here for more of a bioswale feature along some residential streets. The downside of an enhanced swale are that they tend to take up a lot of space, hence their location mostly along longer roadways and larger commercial property parking lots. So that's where you can see them used here, as well as here in another institutional area, as well as along longer roadways and kind of highway areas. Then we move to our underground LID practices. So there's a number of different features here. You have infiltration trenches, as well as infiltration chambers, as well as things like perforated pipe systems. So these systems are located, as the name suggests, underneath pavements. And infiltration trenches and chambers can be a popular choice because they conserve developed land by not taking up space on the surface. You can see here an underground infiltration chamber system is actually placed underground under a shopping center's parking lot, as well as under a kind of a grass swale area beside a road. And what this allows is you can still have developable land area above, and you're not taking up valuable land area, as we've seen in heavily urbanized cities like Toronto, Mississauga, or Markham. So generally, they are placed below swales, roads, or parking lots. And trenches use clearstone, which allows for roughly 40% open space, which allows a lot of high-level infiltration. Water can effectively just drain through very quickly. So 60% of the space is the rock. The rest of it is just open pores in between those rocks. Water can infiltrate down quickly. Chambers and crate-type products, as we can see here in the bottom left, allow for even more open space depending on the manufacturer and offer between 65% open space and up to 95% open space. So a lot more storage per unit area, meaning water can sit there and slowly drain out over time. And it means less areas for excavation. You don't have to dig down as deep, and that can actually save you more money over your construction project management timeline. Overall, these underground practices are some of the most cost-effective because they're used in place of wet ponds or dry ponds without taking up other potential developmentable area, which is a huge benefit for municipalities and developers in heavily urbanized spaces throughout the GTA. The plastic structures seen on the slide are also load-bearing, and this allows regular traffic to travel overhead without issue. There's Canadian Standard Association certification as well, and it's been developed for all variation types of these features. So that can be for crate systems, they can be used for arched plastic chambers, concrete vaults, which are much higher square kind of underground vault systems, and then just high level rock trenches with perforated pipe systems. So all these different systems fully underground, and they can actually be developed over land while still holding a lot of infiltrating water and overland runoff. So that's how they can be used, and the stone-filled trenches are which can be placed there. So that allows for all that stone-filled trench can fill fully up with water. When it fills up too high, it travels along that perforated pipe system out to the traditional municipal stormwater management system and stormwater sewer system, or out to a receiving water body. We also have permeable pavements. Permeable pavements are kind of one of our favorites here at the conservation authorities and within the STEP group. These are kind of an oxymoron, as they're usually an impermeable surface that's been engineered to, in fact, be permeable. And the way they are is pavements have been designed to get water off their surface as quickly as possible, whereas permeable pavements are instead designed to get water in and below their surface to infiltrate water as quickly as possible. They can be used on their own or in concert with other practices such as bioretention or stormwater tree trenches. There are numerous variations of permeable pavements, as we can see on this page here. We have porous asphalt, which really are pieces stuck together and water can infiltrate through quickly. You have porous concrete, which you can kind of see here on the top, in the top kind of middle right. And then that's kind of more of a poured product in both of these cases with fines removed to allow infiltration and create larger pores for water to travel down through. And then you have interlocking pavers. You can see here, 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 up here along the side, or grid pavers, upper right, which are gravel filled and can still allow some vegetation growth with a plastic grid. So all these different variations allow water to infiltrate and drain down into an underlying stone reservoir level, as we can see here, and into the native soil below, or drain to an outlet through an underdrain. So you can have the subgrade soil or the open graded subbase reservoir. Water can infiltrate down into the subgrade soil, and if the water is too much and there's a heavy rainstorm, it can leave out through a perforated underdrain. So these are a perfect site, and they can be used in low traffic road areas like parking lots, driveways, walkways, bike lanes, and plazas. They're ideal for sites with limited space for other surface practices. So if you have a commercial site and it's mostly built up asphalt or impermeable surfaces for your parking lot, this is a great place for a permeable paver or permeable pavements to be used. They generally transform what was once an impervious surface to a pervious one without taking up any extra space. Snow is able to melt faster on permeable pavements because of rapid drainage with less need for de-icing or salt compounds with the open pores. That's how the water infiltrates through. And it saves money and better protects nearby waterways. So cost comparative, you would expect it to cost more, anywhere from 2 to 5 times the cost of traditional pavement work. But the savings incurred due to salt management, as well as slips, trips, and falls in the winter, and the potential for slumping and puddles occurring over in the summer months, that's how you can make your return on investment over the next couple of years of going for these permeable pavement types of facilities. The next one we want to talk about are both green roofs you've probably heard of, but then as well something called blue roofs, which are a little newer. They're building integrated practices obviously built onto the roof of buildings and increases their complexity a bit with regards to construction, maintenance, and operation. So green roofs, there's two major types. There's extensive green roofs, which are shown in most of the pictures shown here above, which have small kind of low-level vegetation and grass species. The growing media is only about 3 to 6 inches, while intensive roofs have a thicker growing media layer, equaling that of 6 inches or greater, and can be planted with more deeply rooted plants, small trees, and are designed to include pedestrian pathways and gathering areas. So the example here is kind of in the center right. You can actually see smaller ornamental trees, likely ginkgo trees up here, and larger shrub species. So this is an example of an intensive roof. You can have those walkways. You can have park areas where people and colleagues and staff can sit and enjoy their lunches, or you can have outdoor meeting spaces. But because of the deeper growing medium, you can have larger trees here, which can also help with the co-benefits of cleaning the nearby surrounding air and helping cool your roof even further. Now, blue roofs, on the other hand, don't use plants, but still retain and evaporate water just like green roofs. They also have a similar runoff reduction benefit. Blue roofs can be done with trays or water retained on a special waterproof membrane stretched across the entire top of the roof with an orifice controlled drain. The example we can see here in the bottom center. This schematic shows that you can have a waterproof membrane, water can be retained on site, and can be slowly infiltrated down through the roof's built-in scuppers or downspouts over time, and make sure that you're not having water enter the local municipal system, which can drive up the potential for a sewer backup in a major rain event, or if you have downspouts that are close to your building, high levels of water aren't dropping right beside your foundation and are potentially flooding your basement operations or causing cracks in your foundation of your business. Now, on top of this, there's also hybrid blue and green roof configurations that you can see more on the far right schematic along the bottom. So other co-benefits of these types of installations include energy conservation, noise reduction, urban heat island reduction, and ecological benefits for pollinators and other species. Over 1 year, about 50% of all precipitation that falls in areas where green roof or blue roof is installed is returned back to the atmosphere just through evapotranspiration alone. So when we talk about the schematic, you can see it's a mixture between a blue and green roof because you have your vegetation on top, you have your growing media, you have your filter media, but then you have your drainage layer, your root resistant layer, and your roof assembly below. So you have that waterproof membrane and it can hold water a lot longer in between this drainage layer and the roof resistance layer, making sure that you're not having high levels of stormwater go off your roof into the surrounding area. Combined in conjunction a lot of times with roof applications for green roofs and blue roofs, you have rainwater harvesting and cisterns, another building integrated practice. So cisterns are used to store rainwater for reuse at a later time, indoors or outdoors. And this reduces the energy and chemicals needed to treat and pump water at centralized treatment facilities. So the term cisterns is quite broad, and it can include at-home residential rain barrels, which can typically hold around 400 liters of water, all the way up to 40,000 liters of underground cisterns for larger ICI and commercial rainwater reuse scenarios. The example here, you can see a large underground cistern that was used at one of our sites we'll talk about later today. And you can see the sheer size by comparing the large ladder that's being propped up against it, as well as the large excavator in the background. The Ontario Building Code allows the use of rainwater for both flushing toilets and urinals, as well as for subsurface and below ground irrigation systems. So if you have a nice green lawn in your business site, or you have a really nice garden you want to keep up, there's another CSA standard for rainwater harvesting systems that can allow you to use this through the Ontario Building Code. Any kind of system designed for year-round use, though, in Ontario must be stored either inside, mostly in large commercial property basements, as we can see here, or underground below the noted frost line to prevent freezing of that water. So this cistern was buried beneath the noted frost line in the area. In most areas in Ontario, especially southern Ontario, it ranges between about a meter to about 1.5 meters for the frost line of how deep down that goes in our winter months. Rain barrels and cisterns have the added benefit of conserving municipal water use and reducing your overall business water bill costs. One of the final ones we'll look at are stormwater tree trenches. So stormwater tree trenches are one of the newer and one of the more popular urban LID practices over the last decade or so because they achieve both a municipal urban canopy forest target for increasing that level in our cities, and they also help with climate mitigation guidelines and standards on top of managing stormwater. So, in comparison to a traditional tree trench, which we see here on the top left, um, they have stormwater tree trenches and soil cells have a much larger uncompacted soil volume that can accommodate higher levels of organic matter content, which supports larger, healthier, and longer lasting trees and or vegetation growth. And the way we have this set up is you have soil cells being built below these crate style systems, which can hold water, allow for utilities to be woven through them, as we can see in this picture above, and this whole area underneath can hold and retain that level of water that also feeds and grows these trees over time. And it's collecting overland, road, and stormwater water, which is a pretty neat idea. So a typical tree trench would only last about 20 years and would have to be replaced over time. Whereas soil cell stormwater tree trench systems would increase the lifespan by more than double, up to about 50 years. So you can see a larger canopy, higher level of stormwater volume reduction and treatment, and has that level of stormwater benefits. Stormwater tree trenches also have the capability to manage stormwater from adjacent pavements on roofs in the nearby area. The plastic crate structures, as we can see here below, uh, are structural load bearing capacity for surface level foot traffic. An alternative configuration is the use of concrete structural panels, which span the width of the trench, which are either held up on either side by concrete structure, and it works just as well and allows the subsurface soil to not be compacted, allowing for increased infiltration potential. In some cases, structural, heavily compacted soils can be used as well that have some nutrient-rich soils filled in between them, and it supports and encourages larger mature trees to grow compared to a typical tree trench. And they're generally not as effective as soil cells. You have all this area that can run perforated under drains and perforated distribution pipes. So water can enter the overflow and into your local cisterns. You have a pre-treatment area with a catch basin shield or equivalent, which stops a lot of litter, cigarette butts, and kind of granular materials. It enters into the system here. If this system fills up, it's being uptaken by a mature tree, but then it can actually be connected with a second perforated under drain system, and it's connected to our typical stormwater sewer system. So it can enter back out into an overflow to our stormwater sewer system if our pre-treatment catch basin fills up too much. So these can be used again in concert with our traditional municipal systems and just helps at point source controls in heavily urbanized streets and centers within our cities like Toronto. The way we know these stormwater tree trenches are used and are better and more effective than traditional tree systems is we've actually done research and pilot systems. So we have a technical brief assessing the health of Toronto trees irrigated by stormwater. And we are able to see that the graph here on the left shows our stormwater maple that was used in the stormwater tree trench, our partial stormwater maple, meaning that we had another stormwater tree trench that we cut off after a year of taking in stormwater, and then a standard maple grown at a traditional tree trench. And we measured the crown volume, which is just a measure of how thick, how wide, how dense is your leaf system in your crown of your tree. And it shows that we have a much higher level when you have it in a stormwater tree trench. We compared it for both a Freeman maple and an American elm, which we were planting. So you can see quite the stark difference between a standard elm, standard maple, and then a stormwater maple or a partial stormwater elm, which were used only for a year afterwards. So in 2018, TRCA came back and made the comparisons between the two stormwater tree trench systems and a controlled traditional tree trench configuration with no stormwater being received whatsoever. The three different configurations showed that the height, the crown volume leaf area index, or the LAI, which is simply meaning how wide and how healthy and how thick do your typical leaf on a tree get as it matures, was compared as they were planted at the same time and they were all the same species. For the most part, the elms and maples were bigger, wider, and had a fuller crown than the secondary system that was closed after 2 years, not 1 year, my apologies, into the project and healthier than the traditional tree trenches. We were also able to see the total suspended sediments, or effectively sediments meaning sand, grit, anything. There was a 97 reduction in the outlet of a lot of these systems, displaying a higher level of infiltration and filtration capacities of these systems. Total phosphorus reduction, which is a major contaminant and can cause algal blooms in receiving water bodies, was reduced, and the level of eutrophication occurring in the receiving water bodies in the systems. We have this technical brief with more information and details, which we'll provide as a PDF on our module page at the PPG site. So we can see that these trees received stormwater since installation 08. Standard tree species are a lot smaller, and they had no stormwater at the same age. And this is a really cool picture. So this is provided by Toronto Water. The inlet, this is what our stormwater looks like when it comes off our roadways, streets, and sidewalks. That's what it looked like coming into the system. That's how the water looked like coming out of the stormwater tree trench system. So you can see it's really removing a lot of those sediments, and it's making them appear a lot cleaner when they get removed. The other piece we want to mention about is there was a total phosphorus reduction of 87%, a major pollutant if it's used in too much high concentrations. 97%, as I mentioned before, total suspended sediments, and at least an 85% maximum velocity reduction, which VM stands for. So meaning the water coming out, you're reducing the level of high levels of discharge and runoff, which can cause flooding. So it's helping all these things, cleaning the water, and it's reducing the amount of water that can be flowing over land. So now that we've gone over the major types of LID, we're going to move on to chapter 2. So what are some construction inspection as well as maintenance of these LID practices? So here we have enhanced guidance on our construction inspection and maintenance. We've seen a lot of these documents come out, not only developed by us, but developed by Canadian Standards Association, our neighbors to the south, with ASCE, which is an American standard group. We've also at STEP and TRSA developed our own professional development training. Our partners at Credit Valley Conservation developed a construction guide. And other municipalities like Edmonton have developed their own LID construction inspection and maintenance guidance. So what we thought to do is we developed our own construction hub. We developed an online sustainable technologies evaluation program wiki website. So we have 520 plus pages just on LIDs and green infrastructure. So you are welcome to visit this. We have the link here below. We'll include this all in our other documents and resources we'll put on the PPG module pages. But really, you can go through and see, as we're going through construction, inspection, maintenance, and monitoring of these features, how do we do it? What are best management practices? And these are all housed online. So we'll quickly go over some basics. So we at STEP have developed major construction stages when it comes to LID implementation. So we have our pre-construction page, our excavation and grading, our subsurface components, our finishing grades and surface installation, and then post-construction. So our construction pages, we have most LID practices work at the subsurface and ground level by routing stormwater flows from impervious surfaces into excavated or natural depressions and allowing stormwater to pass through pervious surfaces, as is the case with permeable pavements. These depressions are designed and constructed to meet goals of the LID practices, which may be quality control of water, quantity control of water, or water balance restoration. Bioretention gardens, stormwater planters, bioswales, enhanced swales, exfiltration trenches, stormwater tree trenches, soakaways, all fall into these categories. For this reason, stages 1, 2, and 5 of the LID construction process are fundamentally similar for all subsurface and ground level LID type practices. To illustrate STEP's recommended processes for excavation, they don't differ between these LID practice types. Excavation procedures are the same, whether for a bioretention garden or a permeable pavement parking lot. On the other hand, stage 4 subtasks, which see finishing grades and surface installations, will vary depending on whether the LID practice surface is vegetated or is something like a permeable pavement. So some subtasks, as we talk about subsurface components in stage 3, will also vary depending on the LID type. So for example, permeable pavements often require compaction of subsurface storage layers because you're going to be having driving and it needs to maintain and be able to hold um, levels of cars and pedestrian foot traffic. The following sections give a brief description of each overarching stage. There's a list of subtasks for each stage and links to the pages dedicated to each main LID construction stage on our wiki site. So when we break down these 5 major stages, these are what we see in the different stages of construction for LIDs. So step 1, pre-construction. This is set at the stage for the successful construction of an LID practice. So the pre-construction page on our wiki gives guidance on your design verification as well as site walkthrough, our LID construction best management practice notes, tendering and contract discussion documents, communication, development of an inspection plan, and utilities coordination with the partner consultant or contractor, erosion and sediment control measures before starting construction practices, and then mobilization, access, staging, and perimeter controls. So the picture representing the stage is the top right, showing CVC staff conducting construction inspection at Cannoli Public School in Mississauga, Ontario for a major rain garden. Step 2 is excavation and grading. So these are necessary for installing LID practices with subsurface components. So that could be under drains or major rock trench storage layers. Regrading the land to hold more water is part of this, rerouting overland flow routes towards the LID practice, and then excavation and grading page gives guidance on your clearing and grubbing, your excavation and rough grading, your subgrade, and then final excavated grade and verification of that new excavation. The picture representing this page is the bottom center, showing a mini excavator with a 2.5-foot toothed bucket excavating the predetermined area of a rain garden at Bellefountain Public School in Caledon, Ontario. Step 3 includes subsurface components. Most LID practices use a combination of subsurface features such as a gravel storage reservoir, geotextile liners, under drains, monitoring wells to test how high the underground water level is, and other components to meet design objectives. The construction process for subsurface components works from the ground up. While some LID practices include all the subsurface components listed above, most designs will not include one or more of these layers or components. So permeable pavements can have different construction requirements at this stage because they might have compaction of different subsurface layers. You can install infiltration chambers that also require guidance specific to that LID type. And stormwater tree trenches consist of a subsurface trench filled with modular soil cell structures and growing medium, or structurally engineered soil medium to support overlying constructed pavements. And they require specific advice to them as well. So the subsurface components page on our wiki provides guidance on appropriate use of geotextiles, under drains, impermeable liners, overflow routes, and overflow wells, and then monitoring wells, as well as a storage reservoir. So these are sub-base reservoirs, base courses, and infiltration chambers and choker layers. So as well as curbing and curb cuts and pre-treatment like an oil grit separator or other types of pre-treatment device which we place in catch basins to help with removal of litter. The picture representing this page is the bottom left, showing the footprint of an LID practice with geotextile, granular, and an under drain being constructed. The photo was taken back in 2012 during construction of IMAX Corporation's headquarters in Mississauga and their parking lot retrofit. So this is actually currently at date underneath IMAX's headquarters there in Mississauga. Stage 4 includes finishing stages, grades, and surface layer installation. So this construction stage differs between LID practices. So finishing grades and surface layer installation for vegetated LIDs has its own page and guidance, while the finishing grades and surface layer installation for permeable pavements page on the wiki has its own guidance as it's a non-vegetated LID. The picture representing this stage is shown bottom right, which shows Credit Valley Conservation and Toronto Zoo staff planting the surface layer of a rain garden at Janet I. McDougall Public School in Mississauga, Ontario, here at the bottom right. The 5th stage and the final stage is our post-construction. This fifth and final construction of LID practices for post-construction tasks ensure that the LID practice for your site was built to specifications and any outstanding issues with it are resolved before assumption inspections. The post-construction page gives guidance on addressing deficiencies and between the as-built drawings that were used at the beginning of construction and the final installed practice as seen to date, as well as final certification requirements before you take on ownership of this practice. So the picture representing this stage is shown as the top center. This is showing a water truck conducting an infiltration capacity test, or as we also call it, a flood test on the practice. After recent permeable pavement has been installed, these flood tests are used to ensure it's working properly and that it has been built in conformance with the original design specifications, meaning the water isn't spreading too far out from where the water is dropped and it's infiltrating quickly through this practice. So we can see that we took this picture back in August in 2013 on a commercial parking lot here where we can show that water is infiltrating quite rapidly through it and is not spreading out, showing that there wouldn't be a lot of overland flooding with this infiltration permeable pavement practice. The other big page we've developed is an inspection and maintenance hub. So once you take on ownership of these practices, how you're both inspecting and maintaining it to make sure its functionality is as best as possible and it's as near the level as it was when you first installed the practice. So at STEP, we have set out inspection and maintenance stages. So this above flowchart style figure describes the inspection framework we use for best management practice lifecycle phases, sequencing and responsible parties for that stormwater LID maintenance to ensure it maintains proper function throughout its life cycle. So like all stormwater best management practices, LIDs are designed to retain pollutants carried by urban runoff and all have a finite capacity to perform this function in the absence of normal maintenance until their treatment performance declines or they no longer function as needed. So their functional and treatment performance will only be sustained over the long term if they are adequately inspected and maintained. Under the Ontario Water Resources Act, provincial approvals for stormwater management facilities and best management practices, i.e., the Ontario Ministry of Environment and Climate Change's Environmental Compliance Approvals Process, or ECAs, typically make the property owner responsible for all inspection maintenance tasks and associated record keeping, although this can be contracted out to another service provider. Proactive routine inspection maintenance program will also identify maintenance issues before they significantly affect the function of the LID practice, help to optimize the use of program resources by providing feedback needed to determine when structural repairs are needed, if and when, and to adjust the frequency of routine inspection maintenance tasks where it's warranted. They also help to improve the LID best management practice design guidance and development standards. So here we see through the construction process, you have construction inspections and then assumption inspections where you take over as the owner from the designer and contractor. If they were to fail, then you would go to a forensic inspection testing or fit test and do major tests to make sure, similar like flood tests, infiltration practices with different maintenance materials or tools like we use here at STEP, like a Guelph permeameter test or double ring infiltrometer. And then if it fails that, you go down to repair rehabilitation and make sure that once it gets to that point, then you go back to your assumption inspection. If it's to pass the assumption inspection, you can put it right into your best management practice inventory database, meaning if you have multiple LIDs, you keep it and manage it in this database. If the assumption inspection continues over to routine operation inspections, meaning over time you're doing this every single year, this is the owner's responsibility, or you can pass this on to a contracted another group, and they continue routine operation inspections. And we'll go over a few of these in the next slide. And then as you go forward, verification inspections over time. Okay, do you have to do this work? Is it starting to fail? Is it not infiltrating as fast as it used to be? Do we have ponding on our permeable pavers? Okay, it's failed. Now we have to go back to that fit test. And if it fails that, okay, now we have to do major repairs or rehabilitation. So this is the full life cycle phases and inspection types for our general BMP LID types. And this is what we look at over a 25 and 50-year life cycle. So here we have various steps. We talk about construction inspections. They should be a shared responsibility between the property owner or their project manager and the designer. At a minimum, inspection should occur just prior to the onset of construction and ensure compliance with erosion and sediment controls. And the picture representing this stage is at the top left, as we talked about before in the last slide with those CBC staff showing their kind of work at Cannoli Public School, Mississauga. Assumption inspections, though, is another term for inspections, which includes deficiency, project acceptance, or you're certifying those inspections. So at a minimum, you should be immediately after the site construction has occurred, including landscaping. You're looking for substantial completion of construction, your releasing of performance bonds, if applicable, and beginning the warranty or establishment period, meaning you as the owner are taking it on after it's been constructed by a contractor. Prior to the termination of the warranty or establishment period, usually it's about 2 years after substantial completion or construction from the contractor. You release any maintenance holdbacks if applicable, and they go over and are assumed, meaning assumption inspection, to the property owner. So if anything happens within that warranty period, the original contractor has to be making those major fixes within that warranty period. So we can see here visual indicators. These are our routine inspections. So you could be looking at something like a bioretention, which just shows along construction inspections, your assumption inspections, your routine operation inspection, and then your verification inspections. You're looking at your filter bed. Do you have standing water? Do you have trash? Is there major erosion? You're doing these all after construction and you're maintaining these over time. What's your mulch depth look like? You don't want the contractor leaving and they haven't put any mulch there. And then you're looking at things like check dams. Were they built to specifications beforehand? This is a nice little checklist, an example of what we've included on our site. And we've included all these for every single LID we just talked about in the slides beforehand. So that being said, that's a quick overview of what our construction, our LID inspection and maintenance inspection pages look like on our LID Planning and Design Guide wiki website. So you can go visit that. We'll include the links to that on the PPG website. So you can look at those pages, see what you as a property owner should be looking at if you go forward with adopting an LID practice and how to maintain it with a checklist over time. Or you can contract that out to another service provider. Now, the other big thing we want to talk about in today's module is talking about life cycle cost. How much does it cost to implement, construct, and maintain an LID practice? Well, we here at STEP have developed an LID life cycle costing tool that we're constantly updating. The last time we updated was at the end of 2021, and we're currently in the process today to update it with new modeling and updated pricing, especially with inflation pricing and a new economic analysis. But what you can do with this free-to-use design tool is effectively design with the parameters of what your site is showing you and figure out a rough estimate of what you can expect to pay for an LID facility. So we'll start here at chapter 3, life cycle costs of LID facilities. So we have our low impact development life cycle costing tool, or as we now call it, our LCCT. So what this tool does is it accurately estimates the life cycle costs for LID practices. And traditionally, it's been a complicated process. So the LCCT helps make this process easier and allows users to produce realistic cost estimates based on user-specified LID design, as well as operation and maintenance assumptions. The LCCT provides cost estimates for not only construction, but as well as for inspection and maintenance of LID stormwater practices over both a 25 and a 50-year time frame. The tool was originally released back in 2013, and we last updated, as I mentioned in the previous title slide, back in 2021. The tool includes practice-specific life cycle cost estimates for each LID BMP that is listed here on this slide, and we went over in our previous slides in today's module. Each page on the LID lifecycle costing tool provides a brief overview of the design assumptions and summarizes net present value estimates of construction, lifecycle operation maintenance costs over these 25 and 50-year time frames in Canadian dollars. The tool's initial purpose was to compare lifecycle costs between LID BMPs given a 2,000 meter squared roof or road or parking lot drainage area. The tool assumes that all drainage area inputs towards your LID, like a bioretention or permeable paver set within your business's parking lot, is fully impervious. The primary source for unit cost data is an RS means modeling software. So research and conversations with suppliers and project managers inform the unit cost for things like gravel, excavating, uh, pipe conveyance, and all these different features that make up our LID facilities. So increased transparency and usability, users can now access the tool's backend, and you yourself can modify assumptions, unit costs, and design defaults, etc., for what you know you can access, and you can also add your own discounts for suppliers you've used before on other projects. The tool is especially accurate when comparing costs between practices, whether between LID practices or between LID and more traditional wet and dry ponds, because it uses the same unit costs and methods for each of these practices. The tool is completely open, so you can modify it to suit your needs. Take the time to review how it works as your designs progress from conceptual to final, and you can adjust the tool to increase its accuracy while you're working through this. The tool is excellent for knowing whether a bid on a contract, if you reach out to a contractor to design your LID facility, is reasonable or is too high. If the bid is too high, you may be overpaying. But if they're undercutting you and making it too low, you might not be getting the practice you were expecting, and the performance may be lacking. So that's the best use of how to use our LCCT. We also have our user guide and sensitivity analysis report, which we'll touch on the next couple slides and will include on the PPG module pages, where you can actually learn step by step how to use this amazing and free to use tool, while also seeing how accurate it's been by having the tool be compared to already developed real world projects and compare its accuracy to its final unit cost for construction. So here on this slide, we have an example of life cycle costs for bioretention practices. So here we have our bioretention installation using a partial infiltration design. Well, partial infiltration design means there's an underdrain and partial infiltration occurring through the feature to native soil below. So meaning if this feature fills up with too much water, it can leave the facility through that partial underdrain, as we talked about before. It's perforated, so water can still infiltrate down through. But if the water level rises up too much in its reservoir level and in towards the filter media, it can be sent out and conveyed out of the system and into the local municipal system. We're assuming 10 millimeters per hour infiltration rate into the native soil, meaning that's a pretty high infiltration rate. And we're factoring in a safety factor of 2.5. That's used by engineers to make sure that your design infiltration rate is at the right level, and you're making sure that you're incorporating a certain level of safety factor into it to make sure that it can infiltrate higher levels than you would necessarily need. The tool highlights estimated construction costs and assumes the bioretention facility is part of a larger project development. So there's no mobilization or demobilization costs on site. But it does provide a retrofit scenario, providing a certain percentage to associate construction costs associated with redevelopment or retrofitting if necessary. The net present value of maintenance and rehabilitation costs as well show total costs, including construction over our 25 and 50-year time frame. Saying over 25 years, your maintenance rehabilitation costs would only make up about a quarter of total costs and growing up to 38% over a 50-year lifetime. The reason this is increasing, and when we're talking about 25% increasing over to 38%, this is because we are assuming that over these time periods for bioretention, some rehabilitation work will be needed. And what we mean in rehabilitation work is you're going to need to replace the filter media included. There may be clogging, which you'll have to rehabilitate, dig out, excavate, and re-add in. And this may be needed and is tied into the total cost of the feature over its life cycle. So when we talk about the construction cost breakdown, This is for a bioretention facility that's about 150 meters squared or 180 meters squared, and it's being able to convey and retain water from a 2,000 meters squared parking lot. So this is the total cost set at 113,883 cents. And we can see over a 50-year evaluation period with present value of all costs, the total construction costs over time can increase with your maintenance and operation over time period. Your total construction costs with a retrofit at 16% of the total cost can raise up to 132,000 over a 50-year lifetime. So we have the construction cost baked down, as you can see in the first graphic here in pie chart. So your pre-construction's about $4,500, your excavation's just over 10,000. Your materials and installation make up 75% of the total cost of this facility. So materials and installation can be your gravel layer for your reservoir, curb cuts. It could be things like the filter media itself, the plants, the mulch. And then to a lesser degree, you have about $3,000 spent on inspection over its lifetime. And then project management, overhead, and other expenses incurred are about $10,345. So again, we can see that the cost of LIDs can be quite a bit of money, but the return on investment over time is your help improving the water quality on site. You can help reduce the level of salting you're doing on site, and you're helping reduce the likelihood of nearby localized flooding on site. And that's where a lot of these LIDs can be implemented, and you're paying off that price over a 25 and 50-year lifetime and life cycle. And that's the benefit of using this tool to really see what you're in the neighborhood for a 25 and 50-year lifetime of installing an LID practice like bioretention. So here we broke down using the LCCT tool with the same parameters: 2,000 meters squared, contributing drainage area, meaning that could be the size of your parking lot, draining water just to this facility, and it can manage all that water. We decided to save you time by developing the information in this quick histogram bar chart showing partial infiltration design, meaning all of these LIDs have an underdrain, allowing water to leave off-site if needed. And we compared them, and we currently have them set up on our STEP wiki guide, so you can refer to these graphs and others like it on the website. We compared the most popular LID BMPs we've done with our research and our studies, and we have a breakdown of inclusive costs for each. So pre-construction, project management and overhead needs, inspections, materials and installation, and then excavation costs. All of these have been designed to a 25 millimeter retention target, and this is in line with provincial targets for what they want for private sites and commercial sites for stormwater management facilities to retain on site and not contribute to the municipal infrastructure system. So we can see here the construction costs per unit drainage area, meaning Canadian dollars per meter squared, with a 25 millimeter retention. That's a fairly heavy storm. We can see that one of the cheaper meter squared practices are our infiltration chambers or infiltration trenches. And as we talked about before, the benefit to these types of facilities and LIDs is you can actually build a parking lot over top of these facilities. Now, they could be a permeable paving parking lot, but if you want to save money, they could be a traditional asphalt parking lot that your catch basins just drain water into these facilities first. And then if there's too much water in them, they can release that water out to a nearby stormwater management pond, a dry pond, or back into the municipal system. And we can see the breakdown of these costs. What makes up the majority of these costs? Again, it's materials and installation that makes up these LID facilities. And the next most expensive costs are generally broken up between excavation and the overall project management, overhead, and other planning purposes of these facilities. So we can see infiltration chambers range around $33 per square meter. Infiltration trenches are about $45 per square meter. Now, the cheapest is your traditional asphalt. And this includes an OGS or an oil grit separator. So this is a pre-treatment device that a lot of municipalities use within their catch basins, and it helps take out a lot of contaminants like oils of grease, a lot of granular materials, sand, overlay and rock salt, water, all these things that can enter our systems that can be taken out by these oil and grit separators that use filtration and then hydrodynamic separation, meaning big vortexes to allow settling, and then those can be cleaned out and maintained afterwards. So that's the cheapest, about $18 per square meter. But the thing with OGS, it doesn't have a retention factor. It doesn't have although it has a water quality factor to it, it's not able to reduce the potential of flooding on site, as it's just a filtration feature used in the catch basin itself. The other thing we compared is what is the total life cycle cost per unit drainage area. So instead of going back, what is the initial construction cost? What is the overall life cycle cost per unit area or square meter area? So we can see, again, you can look at total construction costs, a 25-year total life cycle cost, and then a 50-year life cycle cost. So again, as these systems age, you're going to have to do more maintenance, more inspections, and more rehabilitation work to make sure they're still operating at, initial novel performance levels. So we can see as we go across, again, the cheapest ones over a 25 and 50-year life cycle are your infiltration chambers and your infiltration trenches. The one that starts becoming closer to that is your bioretention cells. Now, bioretention, the benefit to these in comparison to trenches and chambers is you can look at federal, provincial, and private different funding sources that can help fund these practices on your commercial site. City of Toronto provides a $5,000 grant, for example, for pollinator gardens. Those can be implemented and integrated in to a bioretention or bioswale system. There's a lot of federal grants currently available. NRCan's adaptation grant, an eco action grant offered by Environment and Climate Change Canada. All of these are available for access by private businesses. So a lot of these LID practices, yes, you can pay into them and spend your own money from your business side, but there's a lot of grants offered at the municipal level and especially at the federal and some at the provincial and definitely private level that can help offset some of these initial construction and rehabilitation and maintenance costs. So you may say, this looks amazing, but how do you put out all of this complicated data? How are you getting all these cost data? Well, because the LCCT has gone through numerous updates, enhancement, and edits over its 10-year period and its inception back in 2013, shown above are two valuable resources that we developed here at STEP. It walks first-time users through how to use the tool for their LID-associated projects and allows them to garner the most accurate pricing results for your specific project. So we actually have a downloadable user guide for the lifecycle costing tool, which you can go through and was first developed back in 2019. We will have posts on the PPG Hub pages, also the sensitivity analysis document that was completed in 2020. And this report compares real LID projects, as I mentioned before, conducted by STEP that has been completed and fully paid for before using the STEP LCCT tool on it. The tool was used to plan and budget for these said projects, with the developers knowing the final costs of these completed projects done years before we did this analysis. The tool's results in terms of how much the cost of the construction project would be and the life cycle cost of these projects came within plus or minus 13% of the real actualized costs of them. The LID practices that were sampled were 4 bioretention projects, 1 permeable interlocking paver project, and 1 infiltration trench project. So the construction costing results from the LCCT tool to actual construction costs for the project was initially set an accuracy target plus or minus 30% of actual construction costs. So we exceeded this, showing that the LCCT tool is accurate within plus or minus 13%. And as we mentioned before, STEP is currently underway adopting and enhancing the tool to include what's been happening, especially with increased inflation charge increases on a lot of these building and construction materials. So we will ensure that the tool is as updated as possible over the next coming months and years to make sure your projects are as accurate as possible when you go out and start comparing prices with various contractors and consultants. We also have the LID Lifecycle Costing Tool webinar how it works, how to use it, and how to contribute to its accuracy. This is about a 1 hour webinar that we conducted back in 2020 on how to use the tool. If you prefer viewing a video webinar instead of going through our step-by-step costing tool user guide, feel free to access this, and we will provide access to this webinar free of charge on the PPG module pages. Our fourth and final chapter will go through ICI case studies using LID on their properties. So our final chapter today is chapter 4, ICI case studies and using LID on commercial properties and how they've been used effectively. Our first example is IMAX's headquarters. To achieve stormwater management objectives from flood control to maintaining natural water balance and preserving water quality, stormwater management designs may use a treatment train approach. We've mentioned this term treatment train previously throughout this module series, which again means multiple different LID facilities and pretreatment devices to continually maintain high levels of water quality and removal of pollutants, as well as retaining high levels of stormwater runoff mitigation control. This treatment train approach incorporates a combination of these LID stormwater management practices, and that's what this study at the IMAX headquarters office, this is the project we worked on over the last couple of years. Knowledge gaps remain for how LID practices work together, how to modify their design and manage ongoing maintenance and meeting performance objectives. So as a result, the IMAX headquarters site was an excellent case study opportunity for STEP to consider this approach over its 7-year study period from 2013 to 2019. Another benefit for this commercial business site was that stormwater management in the city of Mississauga is a responsibility of the municipality, and it was traditionally funded solely from property taxes and development charges. But due to aging infrastructure and increased pressures because of climate change and heavy urbanization, this funding is no longer sufficient to maintain current levels of service in the vastly growing city of Mississauga. After a stormwater financing study in consultation with stakeholders and the general public took place in the early 2010s, the city decided to implement a stormwater charge. This option was considered the more sustainable and equitable source of funding by AECOM back in 2013. To encourage the use of innovative stormwater management practices, businesses and multi-residential properties can apply for a credit of up to 50% off of their stormwater charge for the implementation of certain stormwater features and LID features. To build confidence in sizing and long-term performance of stormwater infrastructure, Credit Valley Conservation, STEP, and its partners have implemented a series of demonstration sites within various land use settings and are delivering an LID infrastructure performance and risk assessment program to the region of Peel, as well as the city of Mississauga. The multi-year program evaluated LID effectiveness in flood control, erosion protection, nutrient removal, and mimicking pre-development water balance scenarios. In 2012, the IMAX Corporation, or IMAX, completed a parking lot retrofit, which incorporated permeable pavement, bioretention LID practices, and proprietary stormwater technologies, which are also known as pre-treatment devices, to infiltrate, retain, and slow the release of stormwater runoff. In addition to treating stormwater, the parking lot is eligible for City of Mississauga's Stormwater Credit Program due to its site runoff reduction percentages. CBC monitored both the hydrologic and water quality performances and maintenance needs of these LID features on site. And the results at a high level included the 6 LID catchments had a combined runoff volume reduction of stormwater amounts by approximately 64%, which is a fantastic reduction in high levels of runoff, which can cause flooding on site. The overall reduction in total for suspended solvents was 92% reduction. Phosphorus reduction in pollutants was 76%, and other orthophosphate, another combination or type of phosphorus as it forms in the natural environment, saw a reduction of 22%. There was no obvious decrease in performance over time when it was first installed back in 2012, when the report came out back in 2019. The remaining total can be seen here now as we move over and to our table. So we can see the various surface water monitoring sites They're shown here in red. We had a groundwater monitoring well to ensure and maintain the groundwater level was kept at an appropriate level with the water balance. And there's a groundwater stilling well as well to maintain and monitor as we're going through the 7-year study. So these are the different areas. And we see as they're broken up on site how large this parking lot was at IMAX. We could see in the first area, we had bioretention plus a sorptive media unit, which is also a pre-treatment proprietary device, which can absorb and infiltrate high levels of runoff, water runoff, and help reduce the levels of phosphorus loading. Bioretention and another proprietary device known as a jellyfish unit. Bioretention alone in Area 4. Area 1 was a control site. And then you had Area 7, which had permeable pavers with 3/4-inch clear stone and a liner included. Area 6 had permeable pavement with 3/4-inch clear stone, but with no liner below. And then Area 5 had permeable pavement with just a granular bedding layer. So comparing all these different types of LIDs and treatment train approach, we were able to come up with those reductions. And here's what we see at the end of the project. So we were able to see in these different sections where monitoring took place, we were able to see with the bioretention swales using a sorptive media vault, the jellyfish filter, or no additional treatment. So we can see water quantity and runoff volume reductions are shown below. So runoff reduction, 75% with a sorptive media and bioretention swale. That's one of the example of a treatment train. Another is a bioretention swale with a jellyfish filter had a 63% reduction, and bioretention swales by themselves reduced runoff on site by 56%. Permeable pavement with differing levels of aggregates below for its water storage level saw a reduction of 47% with a granular O-type rock. 20-millimeter clearstone bedding had 93% reduction, and a 20-millimeter clearstone bedding and an underlaying liner, which didn't allow water to infiltrate into nearby to the lower subsurface soil below, had an 88% reduction. We can also see water quality and pollutant load reductions. So you can see how high the reduction was for suspended sediments, how high total phosphorus was reduced, orthophosphate reduction with the sorptive media vault, but we saw there was actually an increase showing that minus 52% and minus 35% in bioretention swales. And that's likely due because it is a vegetated system and there can be higher levels of phosphorus kept within the sorptive media itself, or it can leach out depending the different type of sorptive media you use within the practice. Whereas the permeable pavement showed a reduction for orthophosphate, and then nitrate plus nitrate, there was high levels of reduction, especially within permeable pavements with that clearstone bedding below. So we can see these reductions over time. And when you're using a treatment train approach with proprietary pretreatment devices, we can see there's a high level of reduction for volume, reducing your level of flooding, and then a high level of water quality pollutant load reductions, which not only help the biodiversity surrounding and nearby receiving water bodies and your municipal system itself, but also if you live in a municipality that has some level of a stormwater charge, you can actually get a reduction on what you're charged each year in your stormwater charges and taxes. We can also see from spring, summer, and autumn the reductions that occurred. So you can see the lowest are highlighted in gray for the lowest reductions for the different monitoring station sites in each of the different areas. And you can see overall the highest reduction of water quantity and runoff volume reductions was mostly in the autumn for each of those monitoring stations. The next example we have is Honda's headquarters and Honda campus beside the 404. The 17.9 hectare Honda Canada campus employs a number of innovative low-impact development technologies to manage stormwater runoff, improve water quality, reduce potable water use or potable water use, and achieve other positive environmental objectives. When the site was first constructed in 2010, the project was the largest of its type in Ontario, and it relied solely on landscape-based stormwater management techniques, including a system of biofilters similar to a rock trench and a bioinfiltration cell. or bioretention cell to treat runoff from over 500,000 square feet of building area and a parking area accommodating over 1,000 vehicles, as we can see in the southern part of the campus. Production Distribution Center sends water, as we can see here, underground to a rainwater cistern buried below the soccer field through downspouts and scuppers and an underground conveyance pipe. So the rainwater cistern is actually located here, this entire system, as we can see right here. And you can see the small dashed line. This is where, from the large production distribution center where the cars are developed and distributed, you can see that this pipe underground relays right here to this rainwater cistern that we showed that picture of with that huge excavator in the background. This can hold tens of thousands of liters of rainwater, and then can be used for the on-site soccer field and baseball diamond, as well as the surrounding vegetation on site. And you can actually see there's a little an overflow here. We have an overflow dry pond. So if this fills up too quickly after too many rain days, the water can settle out here and create a small little overflow pond that over time will drain down into the surrounding natural infrastructure area. Before, when we were first siting this Honda site campus with them, they were looking at using a stormwater management pond. But if they had opted for that instead of an LID rainwater harvesting cistern, it would not be able to use that vegetated dry pond at the top right or the rainwater cistern, and it would have actually taken up all the room that they had for their playable play fields they have for their soccer field and their baseball diamond, as well as their basketball court that employees can use on site. So that was a major thing Honda came forward to us with, that they wanted to change that around. The playing field is allowed to be here because, as I mentioned before, no stormwater management pond. We replaced it with a rainwater harvesting cistern underground. Permeable pavement, you can see here in these dark kind of hashed, they look like curbs here, are used in the front courtyard, as well as the parking lot near the main building and roundabout. The biofilters on site are a combination of an underground rock trench with vegetation on top. Water was originally designed to flow into gravel filters where it goes to a raised underdrain for water quality controls, with lots of active storage above their underdrain, designed for a 1 in 100 year event or a 1% major storm event, which can cause flooding. Most LIDs, though, are for 2-year events. So these LIDs, these biofilters, provide peak flow control for 1 in 100 year flow in underground trenches. The biofilters were designed to take in water, but they also include catch basins on the site that went straight to the storm sewer to ensure that the site had conventional stormwater management backups, just in case the LID features on sites were ever overwhelmed with a major storm event. On top of this, STEP also helped design and develop and monitor vegetated swales, which you can see along the sides here, which surround the running track, which runs the entire length and perimeter of the site, which help convey water coming off the roadway from the 404 highway, as well as off-site from their more impermeable office buildings, their production distribution centers, and their parking lots, which all drained over towards this grass swale area. STEP modeled the system without LID and then showed runoff from the site would have been 60% in comparison to 42% without impacting the size of the necessary distribution center and the head office spaces on site. Here we see the biofiltered traffic island and how it makes up in a cross-section, both in a plan and profile view, in a bird's eye view location, and a cross-sectional view we can see from the side. And this is what we're talking about with the modeling. So we can see the site would have been 60% of runoff in comparison to runoff at 42%. And this didn't impact the size of the necessary distribution center and head office space. So we can see the paved areas and buildings. We can see buildings remain the same. Paved areas have only decreased by 1% with the actual monitored results of the LIDs being cited. Subtracting 5% of total land area, 1% from paved areas for the permeable paver, and 4% from the biofilters of vegetated areas equals an 18% reduction, 60 minus 42, in total runoff experience, with an additional 6% stored on site as potable water for reuse if needed in the large cistern, and an increase in 12% through infiltration and evapotranspiration of water off site. For comparison, with LID, it was only 42%, with rainwater being only 6% allowed for greater infiltration and evapotranspiration. This reduction is calculated to be actually greater if accounting for reduced outflow volumes from the site, a decrease of 30 to 35%. This was monitored during the 8-month study period through a combination of infiltration, evapotranspiration, and water reuse. Overall peak flow reductions range from 65 to 79% in the west and southeast catchments, respectively, when we were doing monitoring on site. The outer circle shows the difference between what was there and what wasn't there when it was modeled with no LID, with slightly less vegetated areas due to the need for a stormwater management pond being required. So we can see the vegetated areas with no LID modeled and the vegetated areas at 32%, but also make up biofilters and permeable pavers. That's what makes up the remaining 4% here. A cost estimate was also run for the no LID modeled site versus the actual site, which was developed with LID practices implemented, and it was shown on the previous slide. The LID was 10% less expensive compared to needing a stormwater management pond for runoff as built for a traditional site, as well as having their own stormwater management and municipal system or minor system for traditional stormwater management on site. Because the city out here in Markham was risk averse, they put an orifice which controls the level of water going to the storm sewer. Because if there was a backup caused by the large scale Honda site, it would only affect Honda site, meaning they would block flow coming off Honda into the municipal system, and it would not affect downstream anybody else on that system, meaning other businesses and residential homeowners. So the Honda site can show how effective LIDs can be on a very large, one of the largest commercial sites, especially at that time when it was first built back in 2010, and the benefits of installing LID and making sure that you're having higher levels of infiltration and evapotranspiration and lower levels of runoff coming off your site, while still remaining the same level of area for your buildings and for your business practices and ongoing logistics, but also only reducing the paved area by 1%, which actually doesn't really count because it's a permeable pavement. So that just shows you're able to keep your paved areas or your traditionally impermeable areas and your building areas and still incorporate LIDs effectively. The next site we wanted to show was Glendale Public School. Although not a commercial site, an institutional site which has the same kind of restraints with high levels of impermeable land cover. So the reason the Glendale Public School project went forward is it was a response to a strategic opportunity involving a dual challenge. They wanted to address an existing drainage concern at Glendale Public School, which was having localized flooding issues, and improve water quality in nearby receiving water body at Fletcher's Creek, a regulated red-side dace habitat, which is an endangered species. So this project showcased the benefits of green infrastructure and LID solutions and successfully engaged key stakeholders in identifying and prioritizing objectives of the project. The rain garden itself was designed to capture and infiltrate 27 millimeters of runoff in a major event during a singular storm event. During construction, approximately 800 meter cube of soil volume was removed from this floodplain area, reducing the risk of flooding downstream. An innovative approach was used where existing topsoil on site was amended using things like compost or other high infiltration soils to increase the absorption capacity and infiltration rate instead of transporting that used soil offsite and bringing in pre-made bioretention media. This reduced the cost of hauling and significantly reduced GHG emissions associated with purchasing pre-made material and the transportation using large trucks back and forth off-site. So this is how the site looked beforehand. This is how the site looked during construction. And this is how the site looks during a major storm event, where there's a little bit of pooling and that quickly infiltrates down after a storm event. So the successes of the project showed that it was designed to achieve several environmental goals, including it manages the runoff from a major 27 millimeter storm, covering up the 90th percentile of annual rain events in the area, meaning it can effectively manage those major storm events, improving stormwater runoff quality by reducing total suspended sediments by over 80% before entering Fletcher's Creek, and it provides local heat mitigation by cooling runoff before discharging it into the receiving water body. And finally, it increased floodplain storage by a total of 800 meters cubed, reducing flooding potential caused by large storm events nearby and on site. The approximate cost of the rain garden project can be seen here. And here's the construction process as we're going through and excavation. And here we can see the approximate cost of the rain garden in the attached table. Please note construction costs include soil amendments and the cost of landscaping itself with the addition of vegetation on site. Operation maintenance costs are estimated for the first year of the LID, and the total cost saving that resulted from spreading the excess fill soil from construction and amending some of the excavated topsoil on site with horse manure and compost, both increase organic content for plant growth and increase infiltration ability instead of bringing in new bioretention media, saved the project cost approximately over $15,000, which you can see here in the second table. So we can see the total cost of this project was $182,416 on site. But again, we have to compare this to a return on investment and total life cycle cost over a 25-year and 50-year rehabilitation life cycle cost estimate. We also have to look at the benefit of, because this was installed on the school property, this LID practice can be used for outdoor education learning for students and get more interested people into the green infrastructure and sustainability and green fields moving forward. It's a great case study, an educational and workshop beneficial site, which can be used by for businesses to educate other businesses to come on site and host their own AGM meetings or lunch and learn kind of events that can be used on site. And here we have the next slide showing the cost savings of amending the local native soil and not going out and purchasing pre-made bioretention mixed media. The next site we wanted to focus on is the Bentway. The Bentway runs under the lifted Gardner Expressway in downtown Toronto and runs across a lot of commercial sites. And a lot of commercial sites actually offset a lot of their water and run off a lot of their water on site underneath the Gardner Expressway, and that's not including the Gardner Expressway itself. The Bentway is this ambitious project that aims to transform these 10 acres of vacant or previously underutilized public land beneath a segment of the raised Gardner Expressway in downtown Toronto. More and more in these dense urban areas, civic infrastructure is playing host to green and open space that can accommodate both passive and active recreational activities. As the area was original shoreline of Lake Ontario before the city expanded into the lake, it was important to the design team to involve the idea of the movement of water, and this includes stormwater. In order to realize this vision, the team set out to manage not only rainfall incidents and flooding on site, but also some runoff from the Gardner Expressway above that contributes to this level of flooding. The site provides on-site retention through enhanced grass swales, which we can see here on the left being built, as well as bioretention, infiltration galleries, and open bottom subsurface storage units and infiltration chambers. All runoff from impervious surfaces is treated by the treatment train approach by using these LIDs in conjunction with one another. Prior to the Bentway project, runoff from Fort York Visitor Center, which had been freshly constructed in the fall of 2014, would have water and runoff rush down the sloped areas and create muddy areas and flooded inundated areas below the Gardner here. Enhanced grass swales were constructed along the north edge of the site in key places, and the 10.5 meter length swales on the west side of the site directs the runoff to one of the Brentwood subsurface storage units through a perforated underground underdrain pipe that connects to a catch basin in the center of the swale. two open bottom subsurface storage units provide a combined 140 meters cube of stormwater retention and detention holding for the site. The system on the west side of the site receives runoff from the Fort York site to the north and the Gardner Expressway, while the eastern system receives only runoff from the Gardner Expressway itself. Prior to entering the system, the water from the Gardner is directed through oil grid separators, again, a pre-treatment device, to reduce the amount of suspended sediments entering all these LID systems, which in turn will ultimately extend their lifespan, their life cycle, and reduce their potential for clogging and improve their overall performance over their lifetime. The outlet from each of these storage units is set above the required infiltration volume of the lower clearstone base. Each of these outlets have an orifice to control discharge to the municipal storm system should they reach their capacity, ensuring that these LIDs aren't surcharging the municipal system, causing potential sewer backups in nearby residential or commercial sites. So we can see the construction of these underground infiltration and conveyance holdings sites and infiltration galleries. And we can see the finished bentway, what it looks like today with these adopted LID practices on site. The next site we wanted to go over was the Thornhill Sustainable Neighborhood Action Program, or SNAP, is a comprehensive action plan for neighborhood resilience and revitalization that integrates local community interests, sustainability objectives, and climate adaptation strategies under an overarching theme of historically rich, culturally diverse, green, and connected areas. This plan supports a future where a neighborhood's public and private business spaces are well connected and rich with nature, activity, culture, heritage, art, and history, where people of all ages and abilities feel comfortable, safe, and engaged, where the built environment is created and or retrofitted with health and sustainability in mind, and the community can grow and prosper. The greening and humanization of commercial and institutional properties and multi-unit residential buildings initiative, a little bit of a mouthful, but an initiative we're going through with our SNAP group, is held within the Thornhill Sustainable Neighborhoods Action Program, or SNAP. And it was labeled as an integrated action area, meaning that its aim is to bring together property owners, tenants, not-for-profits, and private businesses to implement property-specific initiatives that will help support the various sustainability objectives identified for the local community while addressing owner and tenant priorities. The project will focus on commercial, institutional, and multi-unit residential buildings in the Thornhill neighborhood, of which there are 15 institutional buildings, including 4 publicly owned schools, 2 private schools, 5 places of worship, and 4 other publicly owned buildings, including community center, historic house, a resource center, and a local police detachment. There are 18 multi-unit residential buildings with approximately 3,300 units, which represent approximately 1/3 of all households in this Thornhill SNAP community. There are numerous commercial properties and approximately 600 registered businesses located throughout this Thornhill SNAP local neighborhood. One of the major pieces within the Sustainable Neighborhood Project is the necessity of resilience. So a total of 24 adaptation resilience strategies were identified in the high-level resiliency strategy for Thornhill. These strategies were developed based on recommendations gathered through community engagement, as well as the results of a vulnerability assessment described early in this report. The strategies have been organized under the following categories, which align with the disaster management cycle and help to ensure that the strategies identified cover all phases of these cycles, which are important for disaster management resilience. Stormwater infrastructure is labeled as high for impact rating to help the community. The aim here is to implement low impact developments where possible to improve stormwater management, quality and quantity of water, and regularly inspect and maintain culverts and other stormwater infrastructure. This is to be managed by the City of Richmond Hill, York Region, Toronto Region Conservation Authority, and local residents and businesses it impacts. Flood risk mitigation was also labeled as high for an impact rating to help the local community. Where relocation of infrastructure, meaning businesses, buildings, or structures from the floodplain is not possible, the implementations of measures to reduce the risk of flooding by enhancing flood preparedness through communications and outreach, some of which we've mentioned in this module series before, and encouraging or supporting implementation of site level protection measures, example, flood proofing, basement flooding prevention, and mitigative measures. Again, another thing we've mentioned in modules 2 and 3. You can visit the following for more information, where we have our flood risk management and preparing website, which is managed by TRCA in the city of Richmond Hill, and we'll provide a link in the hub pages below this webinar. Finally, one of the other big pieces was relocation of flood vulnerable structures, labeled as high for impact rating to help the community. Relocating infrastructure, buildings, or structures away from the floodplain where feasible. Many properties within TRCA's jurisdiction were developed in areas of natural hazard. Example, flood-prone areas or nearby or within wetlands prior to the introduction of the Conservation Authority's Regulation Acts. Redevelopment of these properties represent an opportunity to reduce the risks of life and property due to flooding, or to relocate buildings and structures away from sensitive natural areas, while allowing for moderate expansion where permitted under our TRCA policies. Included in this is enhancing flood preparedness through outreach and engagement with infrastructure owners, operators, business property owners, as well as tenants. So we can see here in the Thornhill Snap on the slide above, we can see a map on the left. You can see the temperature showing for the summer of 2014 shows how much higher it is in these more urbanized areas. You can see where the outline areas showing green space, it starts to cool in between that high of 48 degrees in the summer of surface temperature and a low of 27 degrees. So you can see these green areas, it starts to get these little islands of cool in between. And anytime you get close to a waterway where there's even more green space, you can see that goes a lot lower down to 27 degrees. We also on this map have outlined buildings that are either fully or partially within the floodplain, the actual floodplain itself shown in this light blue area, and then within the water course. And you can actually see past flood issues that have happened to businesses or on municipally owned roadways, as well as residential neighborhoods, shown in these orange triangles with a black circle in the middle. And here we see the Thornhill Snap. So we can see the whole area here and where it's shown in the Don River watershed in Vaughan, Richmond Hill area, and Toronto, showing the major green space along with the golf course, parks, and then the snap boundary. So this whole area with Rosedale Park North, north of Center Street and south of Center Street, and just to the east of Bathurst Street, and just to the south of 407 is exactly where we're focused for this Thornhill Snap project area. So to measure wins and achievements in the projects, the Thornhill Snap has been designed to address environmental and socioeconomic priorities, to provide guidance related to improving overall resilience of the Thornhill community. The plan supports numerous municipal and conservation authority plans and strategies, and is looking to measure impact and successes over time with a framework of long-term neighborhood scale goals and targets to be developed based on themes identified within the Sustainability Framework report. Again, another report which I'll add to our resources page. We can see here of what the report wants to focus on. We want to focus on the greening and humanization of commercial and institutional properties and multi-use residential buildings, as we talked about before. We want to look at signature projects that includes more green space, more LIDs, and we want to look at proposed activities and programs that talk about multi-season recreation, improve walkability and accessibility, stormwater and drainage management. You can see in a circle with blue drops, we can see along the parkways or heavily impacted areas from beforehand. We can see any areas with a circle and an M is a multi-use residential building. We can also see a lot of areas where we have cycling routes or proposed subway stations, transit ways, and we can see any areas that are in this light orange. These sections are apart with major businesses, commercial properties, and multi-use residential buildings that are part of this Thornhill SNAP program. So we can see within all of those that we have the idea to have more resilient and sustainable buildings, and those a lot of those green kind of areas focus along our parkways and actually are sited along the perimeter of a lot of these ICI and MERB site areas, along with looking at stormwater management and drainage management along these areas. So Part of this is making sure as we go forward, we want to have stormwater management and water efficiency. Total area with stormwater quantity and quality controls are increased in this whole area. We want to have 80% of total suspended solvents removed from urban runoff. We want to use less salt on hard surfaces through the employment of best practices aimed at optimizing salt use while maintaining the same level of road safety and reducing liability risks, especially for the commercial businesses. We want to increase the number of flood prevention measures increased in and around homes and businesses. And the number of trees and low impact development projects, we want to look to increase and promote the level of retention, evapotranspiration, and rainwater harvesting within this whole Thornhill SNAP project area. The final project we'll focus on for a commercial site using lot level approaches with LID is the evaluation of our retrofitted lot level stormwater source control practices at Calstone Incorporated in Toronto, Ontario. On densely developed lots where available spaces for stormwater management are often small, isolated, or irregularly shaped, source control practices must be compact and adaptable. Rainwater cisterns, soakways, and infiltration trenches are types of low-impact development practices that can fit into tight spaces. The above study evaluated the performance of a treatment train of these LID practices retrofitted by Calstone Incorporated onto their property to harvest and manage runoff from the 3,900 square meter roof. The Calstone Incorporated property is located in a densely developed industrial commercial neighborhood of Toronto that drains to the Malvern branch of Highland Creek. Back in 2014, Calstone conceived a project to create a new green space for their employees by renovating an underutilized landscaped area, provide a rainwater harvesting and irrigation system for landscape maintenance, and helping reduce the volume of runoff being sent to storm sewers in Highland Creek from their property. So we can see this is the area that was underutilized, a little kind of throughway or driveway to their back parking lot. And they adopted this idea of having infiltration trenches, an interior system in their building, soak-away ponds, an exterior cistern, which we can see granted here. The idea was with the reduction of runoff being sent to storm sewer and having potable water to be reused, Calstone benefited from supportive grants from Earth Day Canada, the Ontario Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, now the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, the Water Innovation Grant, and PPG's Water Stewardship Capital Grant. The project included additions of a 9,300-liter rainwater cistern, shown here, and landscape irrigation system, and a rear lot infiltration trench, and 3 soak-away ponds, with a lined decorative pond and fountain. The results? The previously mentioned features disconnected 4 of 6 roof drains, or 2,600 meters square of roof, from municipal storm sewers, which produce approximately 1.8 million liters of runoff in an average year. This in turn diverted this amount of water from the municipal system to their on-site LIDs, reducing the likelihood of a surcharge and backup in their business. The ponds on site also function as a recreational area for their employees to sit and enjoy their lunches or have outdoor meetings. Calstone recently won the 2019 Nature Inspiration Award for the Canadian Museum of Nature for their sponsorship of their rain garden as well for this project. Stormwater performance parameters examined through field monitoring were runoff volume reduction, municipal water conservation and rainwater use, and pond drainage rate and frequency, as well as any overflows. Results showed that the rainwater harvesting cistern and irrigation system, along with their soak-away ponds and infiltration trenches, reduced runoff volume from the roof drainage areas by 64% and 89% respectively over the summer to fall 2015 during that evaluation period. Based on these findings, several recommendations for future designs and further research were provided, including in cold climates like Ontario, it's ideal to provide year-round runoff reduction benefits, install stormwater infiltration practices and underground with the base located below the maximum frost penetration depth for that region, as we mentioned before, around 1 meter to about 1.5 meters, and at least 1 meter above the seasonally high groundwater level. Where opportunities for year-round rainwater use exist, you can install cisterns underground instead of above ground as the project did, or as part of the building's internal integrated rainwater harvesting system, as we mentioned on our rainwater harvesting slide. To improve drainage performance, design stormwater infiltration practices as continuous or connected in a treatment train approach, as we did here in our other projects on our other commercial property sites. And you can disconnect the remaining two roof drains from direct connection to the municipal storm sewer. It's recommended that they can be directed to an underground infiltration trench installed below the asphalt area on the north side of the property that is sized to capture runoff from a 27 millimeter rain event over their 1,300 meter squared roof area and can overflow to a front lot catch basin in their parking lot. So key considerations that we want to talk about now that we've come to the end of our fourth module. We want to focus on what is the cost of LID versus traditional infrastructure. This is something to consider. Most of the time, traditional infrastructure, whether that's asphalt driveways, traditional impermeable land cover parking lots, and the like, yes, they're going to be less than having LID. But what is the life cycle costing of these, and what needs to be considered for the co-benefits of lower surface temperatures, less salt needing to be used, less slip, strips, and falls because of that, more infiltration on site, more retention of stormwater, things of that nature. You also have to look at what are some available financial grants to fund LID and green infrastructure projects. There's tons of financial grants, both offered by private financial funders as well as public, federal, provincial, and municipal funders. And these can be available no matter where you're located in Canada and definitely within the GTHA. This is something we'll provide a couple grants that you can look at that businesses are actually qualified to apply for. And these can help offset the cost of installing LIDs and green infrastructure on your business's location site. We want to review real-world case studies and success stories on how to implement LID on commercial ICI properties. By showing the last chapter, chapter 4 of today's module series, we wanted to show that this can be implemented. These LID practices have been implemented, and we have the scientific results showing that there has been a sizable reduction in pollution reduction costs, as well as a less likelihood of flooding when a lot of these LIDs are used in the treatment train approach. The final key consideration we want you to have is you can reach out and work with us being Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program, partners in Project Green, and any of your other local conservation authorities and consultants who've worked on projects with low impact developments in green infrastructure that they've incorporated. This is a great way to get an idea of how to start developing, how to start planning, and how to start even implementing LIDs and green infrastructure on your site, and how you can look for cost savings, reductions in your stormwater charge policy, if you have one within your local municipality, how you can save money on construction costs and implementation costs through funding sources, as we mentioned before, and how to cost it all out to make sure there's no surprises for you by using our free to use tools like our life cycle costing tool or our LCCT. Well, we wanted to thank you again for attending our module series here. And if you have any other questions or for more information, you can visit Partners in Project Green Resiliency and Green Infrastructure site, where we'll be posting these module series as well as any of our associated resources. You can visit our STEP website to see any of our other research that we've done, including some of the commercial properties we showed in today's webinar. And you can also go to TRCA's Flood Risk Management, how we manage flood risk and how to sign up for some of those alerts we mentioned in Module 2. If you have any direct questions for any of us involved in this project, you can reach out to myself, Daniel Filippi, Research Scientist with STEP, Chaya Chengapa from Program Manager with PPG, or Darlene Coyle, Coordinator with Partners in Project Green. We're all here at Toronto Region Conservation Authority, and we'd be happy to help out with any projects you're looking at for implementing green infrastructure or any LID practices or facilities. Thank you very much for your time. We look forward to hearing from you soon.